Chapter 214. Ning Chen summoned the ghost palanquin. The two of them walked in and returned to their respective places. Yang Hong followed behind. He didn't get too close, but he didn't stay too far away either. He always maintained a certain distance. In the ghost palanquin, the two of them were silent. Neither of them said a word. The bright moon peeked out from the clouds and shone down. The ghost palanquin sped through the night and disappeared in an instant. Yang Hong escorted Fan Lingyue to the northern Meng camp before returning to guard Heaven's Gate. Ning Chen didn't stay and returned to the underworld. In the northern Meng commander's tent, Fan Lingyue closed her eyes and said softly, "One last request. After you break through the shackles, guard Ascension Valley for a year. Don't let anyone enter or leave. Same for you. Amitabha." In the tent next to her, the abbot of Du-Yi Temple chanted a Buddhist mantra and left. In the following 10 days, the northern Meng army kept going south. The Great Xia light cavalry could only harass the enemy and stop them. They didn't dare to clash with the northern Meng army. The two armies fought as they traveled. In front of the Great Xia imperial city, the last major city finally appeared in front of them. In front of Luoyue city, there was a huge mountain stream in the north. It was rugged from east to west, and there was no end to it. The mountain stream was wide and the terrain was relatively flat. There was no problem for carriages and horses to travel on it. However, a mountain was a mountain and a stream was a stream. It had always been easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was even more disadvantageous for the cavalry of the northern Meng army. Taking a detour was the best solution. Xia Zi, Duke Jingwu, and the rest thought that the northern Meng army would take a detour and try to avoid this unfavorable terrain. However, Ning Chen still suggested to station all the troops here. He knew very well that Fan Lingyue didn't have much time left. She wouldn't have the time to take a detour. The facts proved that the northern Meng army didn't show any signs of changing their direction. They kept rushing towards Luoyue city. In the northern Meng army, letters were sent out continuously. In the last days of her life, Fan Lingyue tried her best to leave a backup plan for the future of the northern Meng army. She knew that after her death, the people with evil intentions in northern Meng wouldn't be able to sit still. Mingyu wasn't old enough to govern, so she didn't have enough power to suppress these people. In front of the fallen moon city, on the mountain peak, Ning Chen looked at the northern Meng army that was gradually approaching from afar. He pulled the broken death bow in his hand. As the wind and clouds surged, the heaven-sparing arrow was aimed directly at a heavily guarded carriage. Ning Chen had been knocked on the bow for a long time. He had always been decisive when it came to killing, but at this moment, he was struggling in his heart. Once this arrow was shot, the war between the two dynasties would end. With Fan Lingyue's current condition, it was already impossible for him to block this arrow. However, the shooting of this arrow also meant that the Ascension Valley would appear even earlier than before. At the very least, he was certain that Fan Lingyue was determined to prevent the Ascension Valley from being born. However, he did not know what the Eternal Night Cult was thinking. After losing an ally like Beimeng, the Eternal Night Cult would most likely look for a new power to resist the threat of Great Xia. The northern Meng army set up camp 30 miles away from the mountain stream and stopped. Then, they set up camp and rested. The figure on the mountain stream disappeared. The last arrow was not shot. Before the war, no one had the right to be emotional. Ning Chen had even almost forgotten how to do things according to his heart. Every action he took had to be made with the most rational judgment and balance. Perhaps, since the beginning of the war, from the moment he decided to protect Great Xia, he was just the awareness Marquis of Great Xia and not Ning Chen. A person who had lost his heart had already buried his joy and sorrow with his own hands. In front of the mountain stream, the northern Meng army stopped for 3 days. During this period, they sent troops to test the waters many times. The soldiers of Great Xia resisted with all their might, not allowing the northern Meng army to take a step forward. In the commander's tent, Fan Lingyue finished writing the last letter. After asking someone to send it out, she turned her wheelchair and walked out of the tent, looking at the ancient city in the distance. Fallen Moon City. That was the place where she met him for the first time. At that time, she was called Yu Ling and he was called Ning Fan. That was the biggest oversight in her life. She did not expect that the person she had always wanted to kill was right in front of her. Later, they became friends and she gave him a sword. Not long after that, they met again in the imperial city of Great Xia. He gave her a blood ginseng king. Later, when they found out each other's identity, they became enemies again without hesitation. This was the will of the heavens. The place where they finally understood all their grudges returned to the place where they first met. Do it. Fan Lingyue ordered. Yes. After the order was given, oil was poured on the tails of thousands of horses. Then, they set them on fire. The frightened horses immediately neighed miserably and rushed into the mountain stream as if they had gone mad. The rumbling sound of the horses' hooves shook the entire fallen moon stream. Ropes, pits in the ground, hidden stakes, arrows and all kinds of traps were flattened by these crazy horses. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, forming a flat path. Facing the crazy horses, the imperial army of Great Xia had no choice but to retreat again and again, making way for them. Very soon, the northern Meng army appeared and faced the last obstacle of Great Xia, Fallen Moon City. Duke Jingwu and Xia Zi's order was very simple. There were only 2 words. Defend to the death. After Fallen Moon City, Great Xia no longer had any obstacles. Once the northern Meng army entered the imperial city, Great Xia would be finished. The fierce battle between the two sides lasted for 2 days. Great Xia had a hard time defending, and northern Meng had a hard time attacking. However, at this crucial moment, Fan Lingyue once again fainted in front of the formation. This made Xia Zi, Duke Jingwu, and the others, who had been tense all this time, unconsciously heave a sigh of relief. Xiao Wanhua took up the role of commander and directed the northern Meng army to attack the city. However, without Fan Lingyue, the battle returned to being equal. The pressure in the hearts of the Great Xia generals was reduced by more than 10 times. The soldiers of the 2 armies constantly suffered casualties in the attack and defense of Fallen Moon City. Day after day, Xiao Wanhua looked at the advisor who was still unconscious in the commander's tent. His eyes changed from worry to nervousness, and finally to sadness, disappointment, and unwillingness. He knew that this battle had already ended. 7 days later, Fan Lingyue woke up. His eyes seemed to be much clearer, and a trace of color gradually returned to his pale face. However, when Xiao Wanhua saw this, the sadness in his eyes became even more intense. Fan Lingyue turned his wheelchair and walked out of the tent. Seeing the towering Fallen Moon City in front of him, he said faintly, "Retreat." Xiao Wanhua's heart ached. He knelt on the ground and said guiltily, "This subordinate is incompetent. It's not your fault." Fan Lingyue replied calmly and continued, "In the future, Northern Meng will be handed over to you and old Minister Shang. Assist His Majesty well and don't disappoint me." Xiao Wanhua kowtowed deeply on the ground. Tears flowed down his face, and he didn't raise his head for a long time. Half a day later, the northern Meng army slowly retreated. The banners no longer fluttered. No one expected the battle to end like this. It was beyond everyone's expectations. There were still tears and unwillingness in the eyes of the northern Meng soldiers. They had already come to this point, and they were unwilling to accept it. The pleas of the generals didn't move Fan Lingyue at all. He ordered the troops to retreat, and there was no room for doubt. Under the scorching sun, the northern Meng army gradually retreated from Fallen Moon Valley. Xia Zi and Duke Jingwu initially thought that it was a trick. Later, when they saw that the northern Meng army had really retreated, they looked at each other in disbelief. They couldn't believe that the battle had ended like this. Fan Lingyue sat alone in front of Fallen Moon City. He didn't leave with the army. Instead, he calmly looked at this beautiful land. In the end, he still lost to time. Night fell. Ning Chen came. Looking at the beautiful figure under the moonlight, he walked over step by step. Looking at the northern Meng army that had already disappeared, Ning Chen wasn't surprised. From the third day of Fan Lingyue's coma, he knew that the battle had already ended. No one expected such an outcome. The heavens made a fool of people, causing the originally ridiculous battle to have an even more ridiculous ending. "You're here," Fan Lingyue said softly. Ning Chen replied. He walked behind the wheelchair and naturally pushed it forward. No one dared to block their path. One was a sinner of Great Xia, and the other was an enemy of Great Xia. However, after walking into the city, every soldier consciously made way for them. The riverside in the city was no longer as lively as before. However, the scenery was still as beautiful as before. The willow leaves fell into the water, creating ripples in the wind. "How do you think the history books will write about you in the future?" Ning Chen asked casually. "What do you think?" Fan Lingyue said softly. "Ha!" Ning Chen laughed softly. "A sinner for all eternity." "I think so too." Fan Lingyue laughed softly. The moonlight shone on the ground, sprinkling a slight chill. Unknowingly, the weather had already become so cold. Ning Chen pushed Fan Lingyue around the city, just like how she pushed him in the past. It was so natural, as if this was how it should be. Fan Lingyue looked at the beautiful scenery around her, her eyes dark. "I calculated everything correctly, but only your appearance was exposed. As expected, in the end, you still became a huge problem." "I'm not as good as you," Ning Chen said calmly. He had always been the one losing in their battles. The number of times he won was very few. Fan Lingyue shook her head. "In the end, you helped Great Xia survive. What's the meaning of the process?" Ning Chen was silent. "Do you have any last words?" "Be careful of the Eternal Night cult. Ascension Valley is guarded by the abbot of Du Yi Temple. He shouldn't appear in the next year. As for the rest, I'll leave it to you," Fan Lingyue said. Ning Chen agreed. The two fell silent again and walked quietly. After a long time, Fan Lingyue's eyes gradually regained their former clarity. Her expression also returned to normal. "Time's up." Fan Lingyue sighed softly. She stood up and walked forward step by step. Ning Chen stood in place, a deep sadness flashing through his eyes. Under the moonlight, his blue robes fluttered in the wind. When he took the last step, the chi around him suddenly soared into the sky. A blue pillar of light pierced through the sky, shaking the world. Heavenly demon tribulation, heavenly fire tribulation, and heavenly lightning tribulation. 3 tribulations descended at the same time. Thunder shook the sky and fire burned the world. A beautiful figure ignited in the flames, like a blooming blue lotus. At the final stage of her life, she was still so dazzling that it was difficult to look at her directly. 3 tribulations at the same time, a peerless genius. Everyone in the world was shocked by this scene. Since ancient times, there had never been anyone who could reach the heavens in a single step like this, passing 3 tribulations consecutively. If there comes a day when the Eternal Night cult wreaks havoc in the world and no one can stop them, think of a way to place this scroll into the Eternal Night scripture. This last soul will be my punishment for the world. As she finished speaking, an ancient scroll flew out and slowly landed in front of Ning Chen. Thunder and fire roared, drowning out everything in sight. The blue figure gradually disappeared. In the next moment, the pure karma absolute beginning fell and broke with a loud clang. This night, Moonfall City, Lingyue Fall. Chapter 215. In the dark night, the heavenly fire burned toward Ningchen. The chaos scroll trembled slightly and a faint light appeared. The moment the heavenly fire descended, it immediately stopped, as if it had lost its target and was at a loss. Ningchen silently put away the chaos scroll and walked away step by step. Xia Zi and Duke Jingwu looked at the departing figure in silence. They didn't say goodbye and didn't ask him to stay. The war was over. The entire Great Xia had no right to ask him to stay. The Great Xia had unbelievably won the war. At the most dangerous moment, such an unexpected turn of events occurred. Under the morning sun, Ningchen walked forward step by step. It was the first time he stood under the sun after several months, but he didn't feel any joy in his heart. A few days later, Ningchen returned to the underworld. He silently wrote down the earth scroll and placed it in front of the stone room where Mu Qingxue was in seclusion. As for the life scroll, he would wait for her to take it. The barbarian dynasty's reinforcements also retreated. They lost 30,000 in one battle, but they still helped the Great Xia a lot. When they left, the barbarian crown prince had an ancient mirror in his hand. It was left by Ningchen and asked him to bring it to Ah Man. The news of Fan Lingyue's death quickly spread throughout the world. People were shocked, some were happy, and some were sad. Many people felt regret. They thought that the Great Xia was finished. They didn't expect such a big turn of events. It seemed that the Great Xia's 1,000 years of fortune had not come to an end. The Northern Meng cavalry, Yang Hong at Heaven's Gate, and the Northern Meng reinforcements all retreated into the Northern Meng territory. The news of Fan Lingyue's death was an unprecedented blow to the entire Northern Meng. The war between the two dynasties ended just like that. Great Xia took a deep breath before turning his gaze to the Eternal Night sect. Ningchen didn't return. He had already taught them how to deal with the martial lords and the heavy cavalry. He didn't want to care anymore. Time passed. After the Great Xia took a breath, they showed the strong foundation of a dynasty that had been unrivaled for 1,000 years. With the Blackwater Army as the main force and the reinforcements from all sides as support, the Eternal Night sect couldn't advance even half a step. After Fan Lingyue's death, the Northern Meng imperial court spirit was severely damaged. They negotiated peace with the Great Xia with 30,000 war horses and countless treasures as compensation. Great Xia accepted Northern Meng's peace negotiations and did not make things too difficult for them. The few people in power in the imperial court and the heavenly mandate palace were very clear that the little emperor of Northern Meng was personally taught by Ningchen. They could not ignore him at all. The bad reputation of Jiming Marquis was slowly washed away under the influence of some people. The truth of many matters was revealed step by step and spread throughout the entire Great Xia. However, no matter how guilty the people of Great Xia felt, blamed themselves, and even petitioned, Jiming Marquis never appeared again. Xia Mingri acquiesced to the actions of these people. Although he knew that the prestige of his subjects was too high and it wasn't a good thing for the emperor, he didn't stop them. Because he knew very well that Ningchen didn't care about power, he couldn't be a threat to him. In the Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun never took a step out, and Ningchen never returned. It was not that he did not want to return, but that he could not. As the days passed, the Great Xia's vitality was also recovering day by day. The Eternal Night cult's offensive was also not willing to confront the Great Xia head-on, and their attacks gradually weakened. The temporary peace in the midst of war was always so precious. Finally, the people didn't have to flee everywhere, and gradually returned to their homes. The names of the soldiers of Great Xia who died in the war were engraved on tombstones one after another. In the temple of the Marquis of Imperial City, 2 more memorial tablets were added. Marquis Wangchuan, Marquis Bloodclad. In the temple of the Marquis of Marquis, there were too many memorial tablets to count. The 1,000 years of peace of Great Xia were all exchanged with the blood and lives of the Marquis. The name of Marquis was above everything. The Marquis token was taken back, and the two words Jiming were returned to the ranks of the 10 Marquis. However, Xia Zi, the Grand Preceptor, and the others all knew that this position would be empty forever. He wouldn't come back again. Half a month later, in the netherworld, a bright red figure broke out of seclusion. The moment she stepped out of the netherworld, a ghostly aura filled the sky and turned into a light pillar that connected the heavens and the earth. Almost at the same time, another blue light pillar appeared. The aura of utmost evil was cold and oppressive, and instantly swallowed all the life in the surroundings. On this day, two successors of the netherworld stepped into the Xiantian stage at the same time, shocking the entire world. It was also on this day that Ning Chen appeared in front of Underworld Child, who had just broken through to the Xiantian stage. After obtaining the Chaos Scroll, Ning Chen took half a step forward again. He suppressed himself to the edge of the Xiantian stage, but was unwilling to step into it. The two of them fought for an entire day. Underworld Child was no match for Ning Chen and fled. Ning Chen chased him for 1,000 miles, but in the end, he couldn't get rid of this disaster. A few days later, in the Imperial City, Xia Zi broke through the shackles. With the help of the treasure that suppressed the fate of Great Xia in the depths of the Imperial City, he concealed the phenomenon and stepped into the Xiantian stage in a very low-key manner. In the following 7 months, there were many peak rank 9 powerhouses who stepped into the Xiantian stage, such as the Son of God and Jian Yi. The glory of the Great Era was beginning to show signs of appearing. Ning Chen didn't deliberately delay his life. After endless cultivation and battles, the last piece of the red spider lily was consumed. The poison of the yellow spring was getting worse by the day, and his body began to rot and fester again. Ning Chen covered his entire body with black clothes and walked step by step in the southeast of Great Xia, looking for traces of the Heaven Tower. The Chaos Scroll could disturb and hide the secrets of the heavens, but it couldn't penetrate the secrets of the heavens like the Light Scroll. It was very difficult to find the Heaven Tower. However, Ning Chen wasn't in a hurry. He continued to search bit by bit. As long as there was an anomaly in space, he would go in to take a look. Because of this, Ning Chen walked into many forbidden grounds of the great sects and fought fiercely with the guardians of the great sections. The Sword Sect, Yao family of Yu City, and the 3 great sects were all nervous. They didn't understand why the forbidden grounds were exposed. 3 months later, Ning Chen finally found the entrance to the Heaven Tower in an ancient city in the southeast of Great Xia. Just as Ning Shi said, there was indeed a Xiantian stage cultivator in the Heaven Tower. A peerless powerhouse who was on the verge of the second tribulation to the third tribulation had a shockingly powerful aura. The experts of the Heaven Tower were also shocked by Ning Chen's arrival. The person in front of them clearly had an aura that was infinitely close to the Xiantian stage, but he used some unknown method to suppress his cultivation and refused to enter. Ning Chen came to retrieve Ning Shi's soul. The guardian of the Heaven Tower naturally wouldn't allow him to enter. The two fought fiercely and the entire space formation was about to collapse. Ning Chen had an undying body. He only attacked and didn't defend. Even though he was injured, he didn't retreat half a step. The guardian of the Heaven Tower was shocked and angry. He was shocked that the person in front of him could actually injure him with his sword. He was angry because this person didn't care about his life and was clearly trying to drag him to hell with him. In the end, the guardian of the Heaven Tower stopped the battle and handed over Lan Jun's soul with an ashen face. Ning Chen dragged his injured body and left. He found Ning Shi according to the connection of the soul. After returning it, he left again. Ning Shi couldn't stop him. Tears streamed down her delicate baby face. She knew that this separation might be forever. Ning Chen wanted to see Man one last time, but he didn't know where Senior and Man went. Thus, he could only keep this regret in his heart. He returned to the academy and said goodbye to the master. He also gave the Chaos Scroll to the master. After this meeting, Ning Chen completely disappeared from the Divine Continent. No one knew where he went. In the underworld, Ningchen kept waiting in front of the stone room. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 10 days later, Ningchen sighed softly. He flipped his palm and took out the life scroll. Then, he left. In the end, he still didn't see her. The ghost girl followed beside him. She sent him to his final destination in a ghost carriage. Outside the Ascension Valley, the residence of the Du-Yi Temple was no longer there. A year was up. The Buddha in the human world regained his freedom and left 2 days ago. Ningchen entered the Ascension Valley alone. After a while, the sound of a fierce battle sounded. Killing shook the sky. Sword intent spread in all directions. The mountain collapsed and the ground was devastated. Not long after, a silver pillar of light shot into the sky and stirred up the heaven and earth. 2 tribulations in the sky. The heavenly demon tribulation and the heavenly fire tribulation descended at the same time. The flames in the night illuminated the 9 heavens. It was extremely shocking. At the same time, the sky in the east gradually turned white. Under the first ray of sunlight, the burning heavenly fire instantly turned into a force that could burn the sky and boil the sea. The heaven and earth changed color and enveloped the entire Ascension Valley. Outside the Ascension Valley, a cold wind blew past. It blew the red veil on the ghost girl's head. A drop of tear fell from her beautiful eyes. At the end of the heaven and earth, a man suddenly fainted. Prince Yen, who was suffering from 3 tribulations, was distracted. He immediately vomited a mouthful of blood and dyed the chaotic fog in front of him red. Half a day later, the heavenly fire in the Ascension Valley dissipated. The land within 100 miles was scorched. In the underworld, Mu Qingxue came out of seclusion. His eyes were even colder. The ghost girl waved her hand. The blood-stained life scroll flew out and landed in front of the former. This is the life scroll you wanted. Where is he? Mu Qingxue frowned and asked. Dead. The ghost girl's tone was extremely unfriendly. After answering, she turned around and walked away. She didn't want to talk to him anymore. Mu Qingxue picked up the life scroll. After a long period of nourishment, the life scroll was finally pieced together. However, there were still clear cracks on it. It was mottled with blood. It was abnormally dazzling. Mu Qingxue felt a faint pain in his heart. Gradually, the pain became more and more intense. It was as if something had cut a hole in his heart. It was so painful that it was difficult to breathe. Ugh! A long painful groan was heard. Mu Qingxue's body emitted a snow-white light. After a while, his eyes became clear again. In the distance, the ghost girl stopped. She looked back and suppressed the killing intent in her heart. She said coldly, "The underworld doesn't welcome you. Please leave immediately." Mu Qingxue took the life scroll and left. His eyes were cold and emotionless like before. The underworld became cold and lonely again. The ghost girl lifted the red veil on her head, revealing a delicate and beautiful face. Hell's Rakshasas were born with a face that could cause the downfall of nations and cities, as well as a ruthless heart. The Rakshasa girls often covered their faces because they didn't want others to see their faces. She was the same. He had seen it before. Although it was unintentional, he did see it. However, it was good that he was dead. The tears in the ghost girl's eyes flowed down again. Drop by drop, they fell into the weak water and sank into the water. Chapter 2:16. In the easternmost land, at the end of the world, a man was still unconscious. Prince Yen was in the first disaster. He had no choice but to seal part of the power with the Abyss Sword and force his way out. Prince Yen took a man out of the easternmost land and rushed to the west. There was no doubt that something had happened to Ningchen. A green light flashed in front of the Ascension Valley and they entered it quickly. All they could see was the aftermath of the battle and the tragic scene of the heavenly fire burning the world. There was no more life in the Ascension Valley. Everyone had been buried in the terrifying sea of fire. Not even a corpse was left. Prince Yen sighed in his heart. He knew he was too late. A man, who was in a coma, was getting weaker day by day. Prince Yen kept nourishing her heart with his connate vital qi to buy time. A man's heart was filled with the water caltrip flower. They were connected by blood. If something happened to Ning Chen, A man would also be greatly affected. In the academy, the headmaster calculated for a long time. In the end, he shook his head and sighed. I can't see it. Prince Yen frowned and said slowly, how can this be? No matter if he's dead or alive, I should be able to see it. There's only one possibility. He's no longer in this world, the headmaster replied. Prince Yen was silent for a long time. Then he walked away. I'll go find him. These three simple words were as heavy as Mount Tai. Prince Yen went to the netherworld to retrieve the Jiga sword. Then he took Ah Man to the Ascension Valley again. Ah Man woke up once and said something. Then she fainted again. He's still alive. It was just a feeling in her heart. There was no reason. Ah Man believed that Ning Chen was still alive. She was firm and persistent. Be careful. The great righteous chi formed and the headmaster appeared. He waved his sleeve and the space twisted violently. Prince Yen nodded. He waved his hand and three swords flew out. They turned into flowing light and spiraled into the sky. The next moment, the three swords turned into thousands of swords. Sword rain fell and the entire space shattered. Prince Yen moved and took Ah Man into the space. They disappeared in the blink of an eye. After the two left, the great righteous chi dispersed and the world returned to normal. In the realm of nothingness, a drop of bright red blood in the 9 heavens was crazily devouring everything around it. Soul, hatred, and spiritual chi. The heavenly flame didn't go out the entire time, and the phoenix blood was still burning. Sharp phoenix cries rang out from the 9 heavens, and the phoenix gradually took form. However, at this moment, within the phoenix blood, another consciousness continuously resisted. The condensed phoenix shape quickly scattered and reformed. The phoenix underwent nirvana and was reborn from the ashes. The phoenix's dead soul was awakening, and the other consciousness in the phoenix blood was also unwilling to be devoured. It relied on its survival instinct to devour the phoenix's consciousness. Above the highest heavens, a massive black hole appeared. Everything around the phoenix blood was swallowed up and turned into flesh and blood along with the phoenix blood, rapidly condensing into form. After an unknown period of time, in the 9 heavens immortal mountain, a figure crashed down from the sky with a bang, scaring away the surrounding beasts. Half a day later, a boy who looked to be about 12 or 13 years old appeared at the back of the mountain. When he saw the young man lying on the ground, he was immediately shocked. The little boy shook him for a long time, but the person on the ground showed no signs of waking up. He could only run back to his senior brother and ask for help. After a short time, a disciple of the continent of the 9 clouds who looked like he was in his 20s was dragged over by the little boy. He looked reluctant, but he couldn't change his mind. Eldest fellow disciple, hurry up, said the little boy hastily. How could there be an outsider in the back of the mountain? You must be mistaken, said Yun 13 helplessly. Look, hurry up and look, said the little boy, pointing at a patch of grass in the distance. Yun 13 looked over and saw a 17 or 18-year-old young man lying there. He was startled, but quickly ran over. He's fine. His internal organs are just a bit shaken. He must have fallen somewhere. Yun 13 examined him, then carried him on his back and hurried back to his residence. When the little boy heard his senior brother, he didn't look worried at all. He jumped up and followed him. The continent of the 9 Clouds Immortal Mountain was surrounded by clouds. The continent of the 9 Clouds was one of the most famous and righteous sects in the world. The continent of the 9 Clouds was a holy place for cultivation. It was also one of the top 5 sects in the world. Yun 13 had picked up a person in the back of the mountain. The little boy quickly spread the news. Everybody was curious and came to take a look. Then, they all left, feeling bored. It was just an ordinary person. They thought there was something special about him. Yun 13 helplessly sent off his junior brothers and sisters. When he came back to find the little boy, he didn't even know where he was hiding. In the Ting Bamboo Pavilion, Ning Chen had been sleeping for half a month. He finally woke up. When he opened his eyes, the situation on the continent of the 9 Clouds Immortal Mountain changed. The strong cultivators in the palaces were alerted. What's going on? Many gazes looked down from the peak, but after observing for a long time, they did not find anything unusual, so they could only give up. Ning Chen stood up and went outside. He bumped into Yun 13, who had just come back from the Supreme Xian Temple. He looked at him and said, "Thank you very much." Yun 13 smiled and said, "You don't need to thank me. I didn't do anything. I just brought you back." Ning Chen didn't think too much about it. He looked around and asked, "Where is this?" "The continent of the 9 Clouds Immortal Mountain." Yun Shisan walked back to his room and put down the stack of bamboo slips in his arms before he replied. Ning Chen frowned. He had never heard of this place before. "Are you hungry?" "I'll take you to eat," said Yun 13. "Thank you." Ning Chen thanked him again. He wasn't hungry, but he wanted to go out and take a look. The two walked towards the dining hall. They chatted along the way. Ning Chen spent most of his time listening. Occasionally, he would ask a question, and Yun 13 would patiently explain. When they were about to reach the dining hall, Ning Chen basically confirmed that he was no longer in the divine prefecture of the eastern region. "Which sect does the territory lord belong to?" Ning Chen suddenly asked. Yun 13 looked at him strangely. There was actually someone in this world who would ask such an idiotic question. "I fell on my head. I don't remember many things," explained Ning Chen calmly. Yun 13 nodded in understanding and said, "The territory master is in charge of the 4 extremes holy lands. However, the territory master has always been in seclusion. He hasn't appeared for nearly 100 years. Hearing this, a cold light flashed in Ning Chen's eyes. As expected, he had come to the place he shouldn't have. The teacher had said that the barrier between realms could only be broken by 3 disaster cultivators. Moreover, it required 3 people to work together. How had he been swept here? Furthermore, his physical body had clearly been destroyed by the heavenly flame. How was he still alive? Many questions flashed through Ning Chen's mind. He couldn't figure them out, so he could only put them aside for now. Right now, he was certain that he had come to an unfamiliar realm. Moreover, he wouldn't be able to return for a while. The two of them walked into the dining hall and found a place to sit down. At this time, very few people came to eat, so there weren't many people in the dining hall. However, Yun Shisan was clearly a good person in 9 Heavens Mountain. Just as he sat down, 3 to 5 young disciples surrounded him with fawning smiles. "Senior apprentice brother, can you do me a favor?" A pretty female disciple walked behind him and began to massage his back and shoulders. "What is it?" Yun 13 immediately became vigilant. However, his attitude was still very amiable. "Aren't you going to recruit new disciples in a few days? My cousin has also signed up. Do you think she can become your disciple?" The woman giggled. The 9 firmaments didn't like fighting. Everyone in the sect focused on cultivation. They were famous for being strict when it came to recruiting disciples. The venerables of the Immortal Palace rarely recruited a disciple in 100 years. The rules of the 9 Firmaments Mountain were very simple. They held a competition for outer disciples once every 3 years. The top 3 would definitely be accepted into the sect. As for the others, if there was someone willing to accept them, then they could enter. If there wasn't, then they could leave. However, there were very few people in the 9 Firmaments Mountain who had the qualifications to become disciples. Other than the 5 venerables, only a few outstanding disciples had the qualifications. Yun 13 was the head disciple of the 9 Firmaments Immortal Mountain. His cultivation base had already reached half-step Xiantian. He was only half a step away from becoming a true Xiantian Immortal Palace. He naturally had the qualifications to become a disciple. Of course, this qualification wasn't unlimited. Each disciple could only accept 1 disciple at a time. So this quota was extremely precious. I promised Little Stone that I would accept him as a disciple this year, said Yun 13 awkwardly. Ning Chen smiled without leaving a trace. Little Stone was the child that Yun Shisan mentioned, the one who first discovered him. He hadn't formally become a disciple of the 9 Firmament Immortal Mountain yet, but he was picked up by a venerable of the Immortal Palace when he was traveling. He grew up on the mountain and his cultivation talent wasn't bad. It was only a matter of time before he became an official disciple. As expected, when the woman heard this answer, disappointment flashed in her eyes. She unhappily took her plate and left. In the Supreme Profound Hall, a man with a serious face sat in the middle of the hall. He looked at the 4 people beside him and said, "This time's outer court disciple competition has the highest number of participants in all of history. There are even people from other great sects and royal families. In the past few days, there have been many deans and dukes who have sent letters, hoping that you can make an exception. Do you think you can choose a few relatively outstanding disciples to join your sect? I don't mind. Accepting 1 or 2 to clean the courtyard isn't a bad idea," said a scholarly young man. "We'll see. If there are some good ones, accepting 1 is fine too," said a violet-robed woman after thinking for a moment. "I'll also accept 1. We can't make things too difficult for the headmaster," said a white-bearded old man. "Junior apprentice sister, what about you?" The man looked at the young woman next to him. The reason he had invited all 4 venerables was to make this cold junior apprentice sister relent. "I'm not accepting disciples," said the woman indifferently. Chapter 217. In the bamboo pavilion, Yun Shisan continued to explain the general situation of 9 Firmament Mountain. Ning Chen also quietly listened, quickly understanding this unfamiliar world. 9 Firmament Mountain has a total of 5 palaces: Supreme Mystery, Heavenly Casting, Separation and Reunion, Beautiful Silk, and Jade Pearl. The Supreme Mystery Palace has the Headmaster, the Heavenly Casting Palace has the Sword Sovereign, the Separation and Reunion Palace has the Medicine Sovereign, the Silk Palace has the Flower Sovereign, and the Jade Pearl Palace has the Dream Sovereign. The Headmaster is my master. He has a strict personality and is in charge of all matters on the mountain. The Sword Sovereign is more easygoing and usually doesn't care about anything. He is very popular with the disciples. The Medicine Sovereign and Flower Sovereign have their own things to do and don't appear often. However, they treat the disciples pretty well. As for the Dream Sovereign, Yun Shisan scratched his head and continued, "I don't know much about the Dream Sovereign. I only heard from my master that the Dream Sovereign has the highest cultivation out of the 5 of them. However, the Dream Sovereign rarely appears in front of the disciples. Even I have only seen him once." Ning Chen listened attentively. At the same time, he couldn't help being shocked. These 5 were undoubtedly Xiantian existences. It was hard to believe that just 9 Firmament Mountain had so many Xiantian experts. However, he knew that in this realm, there were at most 2-3 disaster realm experts. Compared to the Divine Continent, there were much fewer. Yun Shisan talked about many things, but in the end, when he talked about 9 Firmament Mountain accepting disciples, he awkwardly stopped. He had forgotten that Ning Chen was just an ordinary person. It was useless to talk about this. Ning Chen didn't care. He couldn't stay in Nine Firmament Mountain for long. The only thing he cared about now was how to find a way to return. Yun Shisan thought for a moment and suggested, since you have nowhere to go, why don't you sign up? As an outer disciple, you can stay in Nine Firmament Mountain and do odd jobs. You don't have much to do usually, just sweep the floor. It's not tiring. The most important thing is that you have a place to stay. Ning Chen nodded and casually agreed. I'll teach you some cultivation techniques. Although you've only started cultivating a bit late, it can still strengthen your body. Yun Shisan thought for a moment. Thank you. Ning Chen thanked him. Yun Shisan wrote down a chant and explained it in detail while teaching him. He was very patient. Ning Chen noted it down silently. He also wanted to see the difference between this world's martial arts and the divine prefectures. That territory master had obviously been plotting against the divine prefecture for a long time. He had to learn more about this world. The most important thing in the art of war was to know yourself and know your enemy. Regardless of whether he could return or not, it was always good to know more. Half a day later, Yun Shisan went out to give some simple instructions. As the head disciple of Nine Firmament Mountain, arranging for an outer disciple to do odd jobs was not a problem. There were not many disciples in Nine Cloud Mountain, but the place was shockingly large. Other than the main peak, there were few people on the other peaks. Therefore, there was no lack of living quarters. Ning Chen chose a secluded place that was not far from the main peak. Every day, he would be in charge of cleaning the stairway to heaven in front of the main peak. The stairway to heaven had a total of 9,900 steps, reaching into the clouds. Usually, there would be official disciples cleaning the place regularly. This mission was actually much more leisurely than it seemed. However, Ning Chen was very serious about cleaning. Every day, he would wake up early in the morning and start cleaning. At night, he would return to his residence to rest. After a long time, the official disciples who were responsible for cleaning up the stairway to heaven found that they didn't need to clean it anymore. The day of the great outer disciple competition was approaching. The disciples on the mountain were also busy preparing for the competition. On that day, many important people from other sects would come. The Nine-Cloud Celestial Mountain was one of the holy places of cultivation in the world. Of course, they couldn't be rude. Ning Chen didn't care about these things at all. He just did what he had to do every day. The 5 Zun cultivators were still in the 5 Immortals' palace. Apart from the Sword Zun, the others almost never showed up. The sun was rising. Ning Chen was cleaning the stairway to heaven as usual. The 9-Cloud Celestial Mountain disciples who occasionally went up and down the mountain were already used to it. They weren't surprised at all. When he reached the 4,000th step, the sky suddenly changed. A terrifying chi came from the bottom of the mountain. In a flash, it passed by the stairway to heaven. The weaker disciples were immediately injured and sent flying away. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Ning Chen was a little further away. When the mysterious cultivator passed by, he didn't pay attention and continued walking. After a short time, the mountain was attacked. Dozens of disciples joined hands but they couldn't even withstand one attack. The casualties were disastrous. Yun Shisan was furious. He attacked with his sword. He wanted to stop the person who attacked. However, the difference between a cultivator of the higher level and a cultivator of the higher level couldn't be made up for by human strength. In just 2 attacks, he was severely injured and sent flying away. Ning Chen arrived. He calmly looked at the Yun Shao Celestial Mountain disciples who were dying. His eyes didn't show the slightest bit of emotion. There were more and more casualties on the mountain. Ning Chen walked over to Yun Shisan who was severely injured. After examining him, he found that his life wasn't in danger. He was relieved. "Brother, sister. Little Shirtu ran out and saw the figures flying out one after another. Just as he was about to go forward, he saw a powerful palm strike coming at him, threatening to kill him. Ning Chen's face looked ice-cold. The spiritual qi around him started rolling violently. With a loud explosion, it collided with the punch. Ha! Little Stone was blown away by the shockwave. He fell on his back, sprawling on the ground. However, he was still alive. The person in black clothes was startled. He knew that a real strong cultivator had attacked. At that moment, an ancient sword light streaked across the sky. The sword cultivator who was dressed like a Confucian scholar appeared. In the distance, Ning Chen carried Little Stone to Yun Shirsan's side. Then, he quietly guarded him. The Yun Shao celestial mountain disciples who were still alive quickly retreated from the battle. They didn't want to be a burden to the sword cultivator. The battle was extremely intense. The sword cultivator faced the mysterious person alone. For a moment, he couldn't gain the upper hand. In the next moment, the dark figure got rid of the sword light. He took a step and rushed towards the Supreme Mystery Hall. How dare you! The dark figure broke into the Supreme Mystery Hall. An extremely angry voice was heard. The Supreme Mystery Hall's sect master attacked the intruder. After a while, the dark figure flew out of the Supreme Mystery Hall. He descended from the sky and left quickly. You broke into the Supreme Mystery Hall and you want to leave just like that? In the Xuanji Hall, a cold woman's voice was heard. At the same time, thousands of rays of light gathered in front of everyone's eyes and condensed into a beautiful figure. The dark figure wasn't afraid at all. He rushed forward and sent out a powerful punch. Meng Xuanji's figure disappeared. She turned around and sent out a punch. The instant they exchanged blows, the black-robed figure let out a muffled groan. As he retreated, he sent out another palm strike. The terrifying punch whistled. This time, it wasn't aimed at Meng Xuanji, but at Ning Chen and Little Stone. Fear flashed in Little Stone's eyes. He subconsciously grabbed Ning Chen beside him. He had forgotten that the person beside him was weaker than him. Ning Chen sighed in his heart. Just as he was about to attack, he saw a beautiful figure pass by. She waved her hand and blocked the punch. The dark figure seized this moment and turned around in the air. After a few flashes, he disappeared. Meng Xuanji snorted coldly. She glanced at the three people behind her. Without saying anything, she turned into a stream of light and flew towards the Xuanji Hall. The Supreme Mystery Hall's sect master appeared. His face was unusually gloomy. Looking at the dead and injured disciples on the ground, his eyes were filled with anger. For the next half a day, the disciples on the mountain quietly cleaned up the battlefield. No one said a word. Ning Chen was an outer disciple and couldn't stay on the mountain for a long time. So, as soon as the battle was over, he left quietly. No one cared. Many people knew that he was just an outer disciple who swept the stairway to heaven at the foot of the mountain. He was just an ordinary person. Days passed, and the tragic scene seemed to be nothing more than a simple interlude. The outer sect disciple competition was held as scheduled, and the leaders of the various sects and clans gathered on 9 Firmaments Mountain. Ning Chen still swept the stairway to heaven every day. He didn't care about what happened on the mountain and never went up again. Little Stone occasionally went down the mountain. The little bun on his head was still very cute. A child's sadness wouldn't last long. After crying a few times, it gradually faded away. While Ning Chen was sweeping the floor, Little Shirtu was bouncing around and playing on the side. The stone steps that had just been swept were now full of dust again. Ning Chen didn't care. He smiled and swept the dust aside again. He did it again and again. He never got tired. When night fell, Little Stone went back to the mountain. Ning Chen also went back to his residence and began to cultivate. He didn't know what realm he was in now. He had already gone through the second innate tribulation, but there wasn't a trace of true qi in his body. Even his dantian was no different from an ordinary person's. It wasn't that his cultivation was crippled or sealed. It just disappeared. It was as if he had never cultivated. Ning Chen cultivated for a long time. Traces of true qi began to appear in his dantian. However, it was still far from forming a cyclone. It was impossible to cultivate in 1 or 2 days. The cold moon shone. Traces of cold air entered his body. Ning Chen opened his eyes. He stood up and went outside. Looking at the 9 heavens, his eyes were as cold as ice. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth swirled around him. In the next moment, his figure disappeared under the moon and soared into the 9 heavens. The 9 heavens were bitterly cold. The cold wind became stronger and stronger. Ning Chen used the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to protect his body. However, he still felt waves of bone-piercing coldness. The biggest difference between innate and acquired was that innate cultivators could use the power of heaven and earth, but acquired cultivators couldn't. Unfortunately, Ning Chen had lost his cultivation. His body was no stronger than an ordinary person's. The higher he went, the more powerless he felt. After an hour, Ning Chen returned to the foot of the mountain. He dispersed the spiritual energy around him and began to cultivate again. Right now, he couldn't go up to the 9 heavens. He had to return to his original cultivation as soon as possible. Little Stone said that he fell from the sky because there was only a cliff behind the mountain. There was no road. Moreover, there was a big hole around him. He didn't know why he was still alive and why he came to this place. The only clue was Little Stone's words. Since he fell from the sky, he had to find a way to go up again. Perhaps, he could find something. Perhaps, the way to go back was in the illusory 9 heavens. Chapter 218. The world was like a cage, trapping people who didn't want to stay. Ning Chen was very clear about what he wanted, so he didn't care about anything else. He wasn't a sentimental person, and he wasn't a merciful person. Even if the tragedy on the mountain happened again, he wouldn't do anything. He didn't care about what was happening in this world, and he didn't want to get involved. 9 days later, the competition started. The 5 Zun cultivators of the continent of the 9 clouds had all appeared, along with the patriarchs and dukes of the secular world. Their qi was faintly discernible, and they gave people a lot of pressure. Ning Chen glanced at everyone and couldn't help but sigh. There were more Xiantian cultivators in this world than in godly Great Land. Apart from the 5 Zun cultivators of the continent of the 9 clouds, there were also 4 Xiantian cultivators, and one of them was a duke of the secular world. The status of the continent of the 9 clouds mountain could be seen in this competition, especially Meng Xianji. She was obviously the focus of everyone's attention. He had heard from Little Stone that Meng Zun had been a cultivator of the 4th Xiantian tribulation 20 years ago. Nobody knew how strong she was now. The first round of the competition was quickly decided. Ning Chen's first opponent was a 15-year-old girl of the 3rd Xiantian realm. She looked timid, and it was obvious that she was afraid of strangers. Ning Chen went up on the stage and looked at the girl who was about to cry. He looked helpless. On the stage, many people were watching the competition. It was the first day of the competition, and they also wanted to see if there were any outstanding young people. Ning Chen didn't want to advance to the next round. He was thinking about how to lose the competition without leaving a trace. The girl didn't attack, so Ning Chen didn't attack. After waiting for a long time, the spectators became impatient and started to urge him to attack. The girl was so scared that she started crying. She attacked instinctively, and Ning Chen was immediately sent flying. He fell off the stage, and to make it look more realistic, he deliberately hit his forehead, and some blood flowed down. Little Shirtu covered his eyes in embarrassment. It was really too embarrassing. The big shots on the stage also smiled helplessly. The third Xiantian realm cultivator was just at the beginning of the path of cultivation, but this young man was even weaker. He was obviously an ordinary person. Without winning a single match, without even making a single move, Ning Chen was directly eliminated. On the other martial platforms, the competition was also proceeding in an orderly manner. The Nine Heavens Mountain had a strict age limit for recruiting disciples. They could not be over 20 years old, and they had a strong sense of autonomy. Therefore, as long as one could display enough talent, even if they could not enter the top 3, it was very likely that they would be accepted into the sect. Of course, as long as one's brain wasn't filled with water, no one would be willing to accept someone like Ning Chen who had such a dismal performance. Little Shida's opponent was also a young man. The two of them exchanged blows for a long time. In the end, Little Shitu won by half a move and barely managed to knock his opponent off the stage. He was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. The outer court disciple competition was still going on. It wasn't good for Ning Chen to leave under the watchful eyes of everyone. He could only wait patiently for the sun to set. There were still geniuses. There was a 17-year-old youth whose cultivation had already reached the peak of the 8th stage. He was only one step away from stepping into the Heaven's Reach realm. The moment he made his move, he immediately attracted the attention of many people. The son of the Celestial King is indeed talented. The Nine Heavens sect leader nodded his head in satisfaction. This young man was undoubtedly a strong candidate for the top 3. More importantly, he was only 17 years old, and his future was limitless. Junior brother, how is it? Not bad. Jian Tianzhu replied with a smile. He knew what the sect leader meant. He wanted him to accept this person, but he didn't care. It didn't matter if the Heavenly Forging Hall had one more person, it didn't matter if the Heavenly Forging Hall had one less person. However, he liked the young man who swept the Heaven Ascension stairs more. The sun was setting in the west, and the large competition was only a third of the way through. It had no choice but to stop temporarily and continue tomorrow. Ning Chen had long since become impatient. When he heard the end of the competition, he immediately patted his butt and left. As night fell, Ning Chen was still quietly cultivating in his own hut. Once again, he cultivated the life scroll, but the difficulty was no less than the first time. The silver light gathered bit by bit. After more than half a month, it finally showed signs of condensing. The small cyclone rotated extremely slowly, so weak that it seemed like it could dissipate at any time. At this moment, Ning Chen's eyes suddenly opened. Looking outside the door, a cold light flashed past. Someone was coming. Dang dang. The door was knocked very carefully, showing the uneasiness of the person knocking on the door. Ning Chen stood up, walked forward and opened the door. Under the moonlight, he saw the appearance of the person who came. The weak and delicate figure in front of the door was 15 or 16 years old. She had a delicate appearance and was timid, like a frightened little rabbit. The slightest movement would scare her away. Ning Chen recognized the person in front of him at a glance. It was the little girl who fought with him on stage today. I came to apologize to you. The little girl stuttered. It was unknown if she was born like this or if she was scared. Ning Chen frowned. How did she find this place? He should be considered to be relatively low-key. In the vast sea of people, it didn't matter if he was there or not. I'm sorry. The little girl continued to stutter, frantically apologizing. There are always winners and losers in the martial arena. Furthermore, I'm not injured. You don't need to apologize to me, said Ning Chen calmly. You're injured. Yin Shuangshuang pointed at his forehead timidly. Ning Chen sighed inside. He didn't know which family this child belonged to. She was so timid, but they still dared to send her to Nine Firmament Mountain. I'm fine. I also need to rest. Please go back. I'm sorry. I'll leave now. Yin Shuangshuang once more frantically apologized and hastily turned and left. Ning Chen watched as the stuttering little girl left. He didn't take it to heart and returned to his room to cultivate. In the next few days, Ning Chen didn't even go up the mountain. Whether or not 9 Firmament Mountain accepted disciples was none of his business. Right now, the only thing he cared about was recovering his cultivation base as quickly as possible. Right now, he only had a cultivation base. If he accidentally made a breakthrough in his cultivation base and attracted the 3rd Xiantian tribulation, he would be in big trouble. He dared guarantee that with his current situation, as long as he attracted the 3rd tribulation, he would definitely die. It wasn't easy to save his life. He didn't want to lose it again so carelessly. Little Stone would come down from time to time. Sometimes he would report good news, sometimes he would report bad news. The little guy was eliminated in the 2nd round. He was awkward for a long time. Ning Chen comforted him for a long time and finally coaxed him. Big brother Ning, do you want to be apprenticed? I have a way. One day, before Little Stone left, he said mysteriously. No. Ning Chen said with a smile. What apprenticeship? If he really fought, even the 5 venerated masters of 9 Firmament wouldn't be able to defeat him. Most importantly, he didn't want to attract attention. Although there shouldn't be anyone in this world who could recognize him, he didn't want to take the risk. After all, he had fought with Ascension Valley many times. Even Ascension Valley was destroyed by his hands. That realm master probably couldn't wait to tear him into pieces. Little Stone left. As soon as he returned to the mountain, he ran to Bamboo Pavilion. He dragged Yun Shirsan, who had just recovered from his serious injuries, and begged to take him to Separation and Reunion Hall. Although Separation and Reunion Hall was also on the main peak, it was at a very high position. It was impossible for Little Stone to go up alone. Yun Shirsan couldn't refuse, so he could only take Little Stone up. Separation and Reunion Hall was the Master Apothecary's residence. Little Stone was also picked up by the Master Apothecary. The two of them had a very good relationship. However, the Master Apothecary was usually very busy and Little Stone was quite naughty, so he was given to Yun Shirsan to take care of. With the Master Apothecary and Yun Shirsan looking after him, Little Stone could basically do whatever he wanted in 9 Firmament Mountain. Fortunately, although he was a bit naughty, he was actually very kind and never caused trouble. Grandpa Apothecary. While they were still halfway up the mountain, Little Stone had already shouted at the top of his lungs. His young voice reverberated through the mountain peak. In Separation and Reunion Hall, a light laugh sounded. Immediately after, the two people who were still climbing up felt their bodies lighten. In the next moment, they landed on the mountain peak. Disciple Yun Shirsan greets the Master Apothecary. Yun Shirsan meticulously bowed respectfully. Shirsan, you've worked hard. You can go down first. I'll send Little Stone down later. An old voice came from Separation and Reunion Hall. Yes. Yun Shirsan immediately turned around and went down the mountain. The next day, Ning Chen continued to sweep his stairway to heaven. Ever since the day before the outer court disciple competition, there would be countless people coming and going on this stairway to heaven every day. The more people that walked, the more dust there would naturally be. However, compared to watching those youths compete on the mountain, he would rather sweep the floor here. Ning Chen forgot that his age was actually not much different from those youths on the mountain. He should have been young and frivolous, at the age where he was competitive. However, after experiencing so many people and things, wanting to turn back had already become not too possible. In the past year, the opponents he faced every day were Fan Lingyue and Martial Monarch level opponents. Life and death were at stake. If he lost, there would be thousands and thousands of people buried with him. He had lost, and not just once. The price he paid each time was heavier than the last. Although in the end, Great Xia won, the price he paid was already far beyond his imagination. He could no longer return to the past, nor could he be like when he had just entered the palace. Even if he had just transmigrated to an unfamiliar place, he could still live without a care in the world. How was Zhangsun? It was almost her birthday again. This time, he couldn't rush back. That little courtesan in the residence had to remember to send a congratulatory gift for him. How was Sister Qingning? Was she still as fierce as before? If this continued, she definitely wouldn't be able to get married. He also didn't know where that silly girl Man had been taken to by Senior. Did that silly girl learn all those random things he taught her? How was little Mingyu's emperor? That old man under her wasn't bad. He should be able to suppress many people with bad intentions. Also, the ghost girl was actually quite pretty. Why did she cover her head with a red veil every day? He never had the time to ask. Was it a tradition, or was there some rule? Mu Qingxue. Thinking of this, Ning Chen sighed in his heart. Let's meet again if fate allows. Chapter 219. The competition on the mountain grew more and more intense with each passing day. It affected the hearts of countless people. At the foot of the mountain, Ning Chen still swept the ground calmly every day. After he was done, he went back to cultivate. Day after day, it was the same. Jian Tianchu was not someone who could stay idle. Watching these children fight every day was really killing him. So he was more willing to watch the young man sweep the stairway to heaven. The higher one sat, the farther one could see. Jian Tianchu's position allowed him to see the situation at the foot of the mountain. Every day, he had some fun watching the young man sweep the ground. Day after day, Jian Tianchu gradually felt some admiration for this young man. To be able to persist in something at the age of 17 or 18 was really commendable. Even if it was just the most ordinary of sweeping the ground. The stairway to heaven was not an ordinary place. There were 9,900 steps. Ordinary people would feel tired just walking once, let alone sweeping every day. Junior apprentice brother, what are you looking at? The Nine Firmaments sect leader had long since noticed Jian Tianchu's absent-mindedness. Nothing. Jian Tianzhu replied with a smile. Meng Xuanji glanced over. She was as cold as ever, without a trace of emotion. Shilin King's son is not bad. The Nine Firmaments sect leader was still worried. Sect leader, don't worry. I said I'd accept, so I'll definitely accept. Jian Tianchu smiled. Only then did the Nine Firmaments sect leader feel at ease. Many of the outer sect disciples who had signed up this time had powerful backgrounds. Although the Nine Firmaments sect was not afraid of them, they naturally would not offend them if they could. The apothecary smiled faintly. It seemed the sect leader had been tormented quite badly this time. He was afraid they would not help. I want that girl from the immortal Ascension realm, said the apothecary calmly. Yes, pure martial arts is indeed not suitable for her. Learning the listening flower art from you is a good choice. The Nine Firmaments sect leader nodded. The immortal Ascension realm and the Nine Firmaments mountain were both peak sects in this world. The two sects had always been on good terms. This time, the immortal Ascension realm sect leader had sent his daughter over. He probably wanted her to become the apothecary's disciple. I'll accept Chang Hen Sky's eldest daughter. She's just like her father. She has a strong baleful qi. 13 can suppress her, said the continent of the Nine Cloud sect's leader. Then this old man will take in the little prince of the Western imperial family. His emperor obviously wants a pill that can prolong his life. He's afraid of death, but he still wants to save face. He's not afraid of being laughed at, the master apothecary said. The four of them had expressed their stance, and only Meng Xuanji remained silent. Hence, The four of them looked over. It was not a good thing that the Xuanji Hall did not have a successor. They wanted to take this opportunity to make their stubborn junior sister relent. Unfortunately, they had underestimated Meng Xuanji's persistence. Meng Xuanji was still calmly looking at the martial stages below. Her beautiful face didn't change at all. 2 days later, the grand competition finally ended. The top 3 were as expected. The first was Chang Jiangli, the eldest daughter of Chang Hen Heaven. The second was Yu Huatian, the son of Shilin King. Only the third place did not have a strong background. After that, the ceremony began. All the disciples gathered. Ning Chen was bored and went up the mountain. He blended in with the crowd and was very inconspicuous. Little Stone looked for him for a long time but could not find him. The Sword Venerable, the Flower Venerable, and the others kept their promise and accepted the few people they had agreed on. The other continent of the 9 Clouds disciples who were qualified to accept disciples also accepted the disciples they liked. Little Stone became an official disciple as he wished. He became Yun Shursan's disciple. His little face was full of smiles. Ning Chen smiled at Little Stone in the crowd. He was happy for him. As for whether the little guy saw him, he did not know. During the ceremony, Little Stone kept glancing at the Master Apothecary. The Master Apothecary smiled helplessly and told him to focus on the ceremony. Yin Shuang stood behind the Flower Venerable and said a few words timidly. The Flower Venerable frowned. After a long time, he sighed and nodded. "Headmaster, I want one person," said the Flower Venerable and the Master Apothecary at the same time. After that, they glanced at each other. The Master Apothecary smiled and said, "Beautiful Silk, you go first." The Flower Venerable nodded politely and said, "Thank you very much. My little disciple is soft-hearted. It just so happens that the beautiful Silk Palace needs someone to carry water. I'll accept a nominal disciple." In the crowd, Ning Chen saw that the ceremony was about to end. He was about to leave when he suddenly heard someone mention his name. His heart started pounding. Ning Chen. When the continent of the 9 Clouds headmaster heard that name, he thought about it and didn't care. Ning Chen was just a nominal disciple. It didn't matter how many people he accepted. Behind the Flower Venerable, Yin Shuang clenched her fists. She felt a little better. "Old Yao, what about you?" asked the continent of the 9 Clouds headmaster. The Master Apothecary looked a bit strange and said, "I also want that person." The Sword Venerable was interested and asked, "A nominal disciple?" "Yes," said the Master Apothecary. The headmaster of the continent of the 9 Clouds narrowed his eyes. A Zun cultivator had spoken. It was nothing, but 2 Zun cultivators wanting the same person at the same time was a bit abnormal. "Call him up. I also want to see who this person is," the Sword Venerable said. The crowd was in an uproar. They looked left and right, but no one had any impression of this person called Ning Chen. Yun Shursan naturally knew, and hurriedly opened his eyes wide to look for him in the crowd. This was a good thing. To be accepted as a nominal disciple by the 5 venerables, was already a very rare result for Ning Chen, who did not have any cultivation at all. Very quickly, Yun Shursan found the figure in plain clothes at the back of the crowd. He quickly walked forward and pulled him out. Compared to Yun Shursan's anxiousness, Ning Chen was not that excited. "It's you." When the Sword Venerable saw Ning Chen, he was surprised. "Junior brother, you know him too?" The 9 Clouds sect leader frowned and asked. "I don't know him." The Sword Sovereign regained his senses and laughed. "However, since the 2 venerable ones want someone, I will also join in the fun. Young man, how about you go to my heavenly forging hall? Since you are all nominal disciples, rather than going to their place to fetch water and burn fire, you might as well go to my place and continue sweeping the floor." "Fuck you." Ning Chen cursed in his heart. This sword venerable was obviously just watching the show. Junior brother, don't mess around. The Nine Cloud sect leader scolded softly. Hee hee. The sword venerable laughed lightly and did not mind. The Nine Cloud sect leader looked at the figure below and said indifferently, "You're called Ning Chen, right? I'll give you the right to choose between the Flower Venerable and the Medicine Venerable." The Flower Venerable and the Medicine Venerable were also watching, but they didn't care who Ning Chen chose. A young man with such talent couldn't arouse their interest. "You can choose me too." The Sword Venerable was very interested and spoke again. Ning Chen calmly looked at the 5 people on the high platform. He didn't feel anything in his heart, he just felt bored. Yun Shirsan was extremely anxious at the side. He couldn't find such an opportunity even if he used a lantern. Little Stone also kept winking at Ning Chen, telling him to choose the Medicine Venerable. He had spent a lot of effort to make the Medicine Venerable agree. Reporting to the sect leader, "I don't want to be a nominal disciple." Ning Chen tactfully refused. The people present were not stupid. They could naturally hear the rejection in his words. The Nine Cloud sect leader's expression immediately became ugly. He really didn't know what was good for him. Yun Shirsan and Little Stone were very anxious, but they didn't dare say anything. They just stood there, winking at each other. The Sword Venerable was also startled by this reply, but he quickly came back to his senses. The playful expression on his face became even stronger. This little fellow was even more interesting than he had imagined. "You can leave." The Nine Cloud sect leader suppressed his anger and waved his hand. Ning Chen sighed in relief. Without saying anything else, he turned and left. "Wait." Meng Xuanji stood up. A beam of light flashed and a palm shot out. Ning Chen instinctively wanted to fight back, but the moment he raised his hand, he forced himself to endure the palm. With a bang, Sui was sent flying dozens of meters away. Ning Chen stood up and bit the tip of his tongue. A trace of blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Meng Xuanji narrowed her eyes and said, "I'll accept you as my disciple." The Nine Cloud sect leader, the Medicine Venerable, and the others were all startled. They didn't understand what was going on. The Sword Venerable's reaction was the fastest. Although he didn't know why Meng Xuanji had made such a decision, his intuition told him that if Meng Xuanji chose him, he had to steal him. "I'll accept you as my disciple." The Sword Venerable put away his joking expression and said seriously. The Medicine Venerable and the Flower Venerable both frowned. What was going on? The Nine Cloud sect leader also couldn't figure out what was going on. He looked at Meng Xuanji beside him. Meng Xuanji didn't explain anything. She just glanced at Jian Tianzhu and said indifferently, "If you can beat me, you can take this person away." The Sword Venerable's expression froze. He smiled sheepishly. He had almost forgotten about this matter. Ning Chen just watched quietly. After the two finished speaking, he said, "I don't like to learn martial arts." Impudent. The Nine Cloud sect leader couldn't hold back his anger anymore. He slammed the table and stood up, shouting angrily. Ning Chen lowered his head and didn't say anything. "You can do whatever you want." The many disciples below the high platform were dumbfounded. This was the first time they had seen such a situation. A free opportunity to be apprenticed to a master had fallen from the sky, but there was someone who didn't want to eat it and even stepped on it. Chang Jiangli and Shilin King's son. Yu Huatian's eyes began to flicker. He still didn't understand what was going on. Ning Chen felt helpless. When he saw the little girl beside the Flower Venerable who was avoiding his gaze, and when he saw Little Stone who kept winking at him, he roughly guessed what was going on. He couldn't become a disciple. Although it was out of his expectations that he would make such a big joke this time, no matter how strange it was, everyone's interest would fade after a few days. After all, no one could keep their eyes on an ordinary person who didn't know what was good for him. However, once he entered any of the celestial palaces, things would be really troublesome. The 9 Clouds was a holy land for cultivation. There would definitely be people watching at all times. Moreover, the 5 venerables were all Xiantian cultivators. His actions would be greatly restricted. It was too disadvantageous for him. Men, throw this person down the mountain. He's not allowed to step half a step into the 9 Clouds in this lifetime. The 9 Cloud sect leader waved his sleeve and said angrily. Master. Sect leader. Yunshisan and Little Stone didn't have time to be afraid anymore. They immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. Below, the corners of Ning Chen's mouth curved slightly. He couldn't ask for more. Chapter 220. The sect master was enraged, and everyone was afraid. Yunshisan and Little Stone, who were kneeling below, did not dare to say anything. 2 law enforcement disciples stepped forward and brought Ning Chen down the mountain. Ning Chen did not struggle and was very cooperative. He almost thanked the 2 of them. Yunshisan and Little Stone were anxious, but there was nothing they could do. They could only kneel there and watch as Ning Chen was taken away. Meng Xuanji watched quietly as the 2 law enforcement disciples took Ning Chen away. She did not say anything. When the 3 of them were about to reach the sky ascension stairs, she waved her hand and brought the 3 of them back. I said I wanted to take you as my disciple just to let you know. As for whether you are willing or not, it is not up to you to decide. Meng Xuanji stepped forward and said indifferently. Does 9 Clouds Mountain have a rule of forcefully taking in disciples? Sect Master, and all the sect masters and dukes here, did I hear wrongly, or did everyone else hear wrongly? Ning Chen's eyes gradually turned cold as he spoke. Xuanji. The 9 Cloud sect master's expression was extremely ugly. He reminded her to pay attention to the situation. The nobles and important figures of the various sects watched this farce with great interest. In any case, they could not see anything special about this young man. Other than his courage and ignorance, there was nothing worth talking about. There was never a lack of strange people in this world. They had lived for so long and were already used to it. Meng Xuanji ignored the sect master's reminder. She formed a strange seal with her slender hand and waved it into the young man's body. Separation Death Seal. Everyone's expression changed as they exclaimed. This was an extremely difficult technique to cultivate. It could restrict a person's freedom. If the practitioner did not release it, it would be difficult to break free forever. Ning Chen's eyes were extremely cold. He no longer suppressed the coldness in his body. Although he did not know what the separation death seal was, he knew how terrifying it was from these people's reactions. He was not afraid, but that did not mean he did not care. The 9 Cloud sect master and the other 3 were extremely shocked. What was wrong with Xuanji today? Follow me. Meng Xuanji waved her hand and swept Ning Chen up. She turned into a ray of light and flew towards the Xuanji Hall in the distance. Everyone came back to their senses and looked at each other. They were so shocked that they could not say a word. The apprenticeship ceremony ended in an inconceivable ending. No one could understand what was going on, and they left with a belly full of confusion. In the extremely cold lands of the northern frontier, 2 figures were moving forward, one in front and one behind. The person in front was dressed in green robes. He was simple yet noble, and his black hair danced in the wind. He was extremely extraordinary. The person behind him was dressed like a steamed bun. Her delicate little face was red from the cold, and she looked extremely cute. Senior, this place is so cold, said Wild. Heh. Prince Yen chuckled and said, bear with it for a while. We'll be there soon. Not long after Wild had arrived, he had woken up on his own. Without a doubt, that kid wasn't dead. However, the 4 extremes were not small. Moreover, with Ning Chen's intelligence, he would definitely think of ways to hide himself well. It would not be easy to find him in a short period of time. He had heard of the origin of the realm of the four extremes. It was because this realm had four extreme lands. Since he had the opportunity to come here, he had to take some things with him. Ah man, this little girl had it tough. Wild obediently followed behind. Her big eyes and eyelashes were covered with ice crystals. She looked left and right. Although it was very cold, she was also very curious. Prince Yen smiled. As the little princess of a dynasty, this little girl's performance was enough to make him look at her in a new light. If Ning Chen had come in such a cold place when he was a fifth-stage Hotian, he would most likely have been so cold that he would be full of greetings. Not having suffered before did not mean that she could not suffer. Or perhaps, in this little girl's heart, the word suffering did not exist, and she would not think so much about it. The human heart was really the most beautiful thing in the world in Little Wild's heart. The wind and snow came and the two gradually disappeared in the vast expanse of white wind and snow. Two footprints, one deep and one shallow, were quickly covered by the snow. Xuanji Hall. 10 days had passed. Meng Xuanji and Ning Chen's relationship was still extremely bad. There was no room for conversation. There was no ceremony or tea between the two of them. There were so many people present that day, and everyone clearly saw what had happened. The reputation of forcefully taking in a disciple was really disgraceful. Nine Heavens Mountain could not afford to lose this face. Therefore, Ning Chen's identity was still that of an outer disciple. The power of the separation and reunion death seal was not too strong. Meng Xuanji only wanted to restrict Ning Chen's freedom and did not use all of her cultivation. Ning Chen also did not forcefully break through. He did not want to expose himself now. At least, before he found his way back, he did not want to attract any trouble. He even had a feeling that Meng Xuanji had seen through something. However, he definitely could not ask this question. The competition for inner disciples was getting closer and closer. Nine Heavens Mountain intended to let the new disciples see the strength of the sect. Therefore, the competition for inner disciples was very close to the competition for outer disciples. Yun Shisan was still the most popular candidate for first place. Although there were many innate masters in this world, they were all people who stood at the top. Half-step innate masters were extremely powerful among the younger generation. Ning Chen became the most idle person on the mountain. He did not need to clean the sky ascension stairs, nor did he need to do his own tasks like the other disciples. Meng Xuanji only threw down a cultivation technique scroll and did not care about the rest. Ning Chen did not even touch this cultivation technique scroll. Every day, he silently cultivated the life scroll. In his spare time, he would cultivate the cultivation technique that Yun Shisan taught him as a cover. Half a month later, the results of the competition for inner disciples were out. Yun Shisan was indeed first place. However, the girl named Chang Jiangli unexpectedly obtained third place, shocking many people. The 5 immortal palaces of Nine Heavens Mountain each occupied a peak. Only the Supreme Mystery Temple was on the main peak. However, the other 4 palaces could only be reached by passing through the main peak. The disciples of the 5 immortal palaces would all cultivate on their own peaks. They all entered the sect at the same time. It was inevitable that they would have thoughts of competing with each other. In the following 2 months, the little girl that Senior Flower had taken in actually broke through 3 levels consecutively and reached the 6th grade natal stage. This gave everyone a big shock. The Shilin King's son that Senior Sword had taken in was not to be outdone. He stepped into the 9th grade from the peak of the 8th grade. The little prince that Senior Apothecary had taken in was slightly less talented. However, he also broke through 1 level and entered the 7th grade. Only Ning Chen was still cultivating at a moderate pace. He stepped into the 1st grade from the ungraded natal stage and then slowly moved forward. The cultivation of martial arts was easy at first but difficult at later stages. Moreover, it would only get harder and harder. Ning Chen's cultivation speed was really unflattering. Meng Xuanji did not care. She had no intention of giving him any pointers. Everything was up to him. Ning Chen was also not in a hurry. After cultivating the life scroll, he would cultivate the earth and heaven scrolls. Now that he was in the innate stage, he could already cultivate the moves within the scrolls. He could take it slow and could not be rushed. Meng Xuanji would use her spiritual awareness to check what Ning Chen was doing outside the Hall of 4 Stars every day. Rather than saying that she was paying attention, it was better to say that she was monitoring him. She was indeed suspicious of this young man. That was why she kept him by her side. In a place filled with black rocks, a strange palace stood tall. The surroundings were dark and gloomy, giving people an extremely heavy feeling. The Longevity Hall was one of the most terrifying places in the world. It had existed since ancient times. In the hall, a person was kneeling. It had been several months. Suddenly, a terrifying aura like a landslide appeared. The sky changed color and the space in the hall started to distort violently. The person kneeling in the hall prostrated himself even lower. His entire head was already on the ground. Don't tell me that you didn't get it. Disaster King, please spare me. The person on the ground kept trembling as he begged for mercy. Trash. The void stirred and a figure in flowing light armor walked out. With a wave of his hand, the person in the hall was smashed into the ground. Blood flowed out, but the person on the ground did not dare to move at all. He allowed his blood to dye his body red. The Disaster King's eyes flickered coldly. Ascension Valley had been destroyed. Many years of preparation had gone to waste. He had to find a way to send someone over and find a third 3 disasters expert. Then, he would work together to break the boundary between the 2 stages. In 9 Clouds Mountain, there was a golden feather scorpion that could break through the boundary in an extremely short time. Together with the master of the 4 extremes, they should be able to send a 3 disasters innate stage expert over. 9 Clouds Mountain's Dream Sovereign was a big problem. He had repeatedly rejected his attempts to rope him in. However, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to take action personally. Other than the 4 extremes sacred grounds, 9 Clouds Mountain, Immortal Ascension Realm, Cherishing Flower Palace, and Longevity Hall did not have much difference in the number of innate stage experts. Before he was fully prepared, he could not act rashly and alert the enemy. It seemed that he had to find a way to lure Dream Sovereign out of 9 Clouds Mountain. Otherwise, it would be difficult for his trash subordinates to succeed. Thinking of this, the Disaster King looked down and said coldly, "Inform all the sects that the Realm Master has ordered that the sacred grounds will hold a longevity banquet in 3 months. He hopes that the sovereigns of all sects will be present." "Yes." The person prostrating on the ground hurriedly responded. He immediately got up and left. In the next moment, the Disaster King's figure faded. The strange Longevity Hall became cold and dark. There was no longer any sound. 3 days later, the Realm Master's order was sent to all the sections 9 Clouds Mountain, Immortal Ascension Realm, and Cherishing Flower Palace's headmaster frowned after seeing the invitation. The Realm Master had not appeared for 100 years. Why would he suddenly send such an order? Although they had doubts, they still had to be careful when dealing with the Sacred Grounds orders. 13. Send this invitation to the Xuanji Hall, said the 9 Clouds headmaster. Yun 13 obeyed and quickly walked out of the Supreme Mystery Hall. He rushed towards the Xuanji Hall on another peak. On the Xuanji peak, Ning Chen looked at the figure in the distance and narrowed his eyes. Something had happened. He had been in the continent of the 9 Clouds for a long time. He knew that the Xuanji Hall had a special status in the continent of the 9 Clouds. As long as it was not an extremely important matter, no disciple would come. Yun 13 went up the mountain and looked at the figure in front of him. He said, Ning Chen, where is Dream Sovereign? I don't know. Ning Chen shook his head. The Xuanji Hall was so big. How could he know where that woman was? What's the matter? At that moment, a ripple appeared in the air. Meng Xuanji appeared out of nowhere. Chapter 221. Yun Shisan handed over the invitation and said respectfully, reporting to Venerable Meng, in 3 months, the Realm Master will hold a longevity banquet in the sacred ground. He has invited all the Venerables to attend. Master asked me to inform you. Meng Xuanji took the invitation and said calmly, got it. You can go back. Yes. Yun Shisan bowed and turned to leave the mountain. Hearing the words Realm Master again, Ning Chen's heart sank. This was troublesome. Meng Xuanji looked at the person in front of her and said indifferently, do you think I should go or not? Ning Chen raised his head and looked at Meng Xuanji. He said coldly, does Venerable Meng care about other people's opinions? I don't care, but I still want to know your answer. Meng Xuanji said. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly was this woman suspecting of him? There shouldn't be any flaws on his body. Now, he was not much different from an ordinary person. His first-grade Hotian cultivation was not much different from nothing. Why did he keep feeling that Meng Xuanji was on guard against him? He didn't believe that Meng Xuanji had seen through his identity. If that was the case, they wouldn't be standing here and talking to each other. Thinking of this, Ning Chen said calmly, whether you go or not, it's none of my business. It doesn't make any difference to me. Meng Xuanji stared at him for a long time. After 10 breaths, she turned and walked back to the Xuanji Hall. From today onwards, you don't have to stay on the Xuanji Peak. As long as you don't leave for more than 10 hours, the separation and reunion death seal in your body won't act up. Ning Chen's eyes flashed. It seemed that he needed to understand more. He didn't know anything about the 4 extremes sacred ground. He didn't even know the name of the Realm Master. The Realm Master wouldn't hold a longevity banquet for no reason. Yun Shisan had said that the Realm Master hadn't appeared in the world for nearly 100 years. Now that he suddenly made a move, there must be a reason. There had never been a good banquet. In his opinion, it was either a trap or a diversion. As for the purpose, he still couldn't judge. He needed more information. He needed to understand the situation of the 4 extremes sacred ground as soon as possible, especially the 4 extremes sacred ground and the sects that had received the invitation. There was a sutra depository on the mountain with all kinds of books and scrolls. Ning Chen borrowed Yun Shisan's token and stayed there for 6 hours every day. Because the token was borrowed, Ning Chen was unable to go up to the 2nd and 3rd floors. He could only flip through the books on the 1st floor. However, this was already enough. The records of each sect were not considered a secret. The things that were truly confidential would not be divulged by the sections. 9 Heavens Mountain, Immortal Ascension Realm, Cherishing Flower Palace, and Long Life Palace, these names appeared one after another in the ancient scroll. Every single one of them was a great sect that had existed for thousands of years, never declining since ancient times. After searching for many days, Ning Chen found countless pieces of information. Among them, there were records regarding the Disaster King. He was the master of the Longevity Palace, the second most powerful existence in the world, second only to the Lord of the 4 extreme realms. He had been in control of the Longevity Hall for 300 years, and his strength was unfathomable. He had never exchanged more than 10 blows with anyone. 100 years ago, he stepped into the 3 disasters realm and rarely appeared in the world. Meng Xuanji's name could also be seen. She was an expert who had undergone the 4th tribulation of the Khanate tribulation 20 years ago. No one knew what her current cultivation level was. He checked day after day for more than half a month without stopping. Ning Chen did not find anything suspicious, but he continued to check patiently every day. Any useful information was found from a large pile of useless things. This was much better than the countless messy pieces of information he had to go through every day in the Jiming Marquis residence. After another 6 or 7 days, Ning Chen finally found something he wanted to see in an ancient scroll. This ancient scroll recorded information about the divine weapons of various sects and schools, especially the Nine Heavens Mountain, the Immortal Realm, the Cherishing Flower Palace, and the Hall of Eternal Life's 4 most precious treasures. Even their diagrams and functions were listed. The Nine Heavens Mountain's gilded feather saber was the sharpest weapon in the world. The Immortal Ascension Realm's Yin-Yang Jade could mobilize the spiritual qi of the world and push any formation to the limit. The Cherishing Flower Palace's Joyful Union Bell could control a person's mind. Even Khanate cultivators would find it difficult to resist. The Long Life Palace's Reincarnation Mirror would strip away the 3 souls and 7 spirits of those who were shown upon and absorb them. They would never be able to escape. When Ning Chen saw this information, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He came from the divine land of the eastern region. He knew very well that the masters of the 4 extremes wanted to invade the divine land. The biggest obstacle was the boundary between the 2 realms. However, according to his judgment these days, most of the sects in this realm should not know that the masters of the 4 extremes wanted to invade other realms. He had already destroyed Ascension Valley and lost contact with the divine land. It was undoubtedly more difficult for the masters of the 4 extremes to open the boundary between realms. He did not know what the masters of the 4 extremes would do, but to open a passage between the 2 realms, they had to re-establish contact with the divine land. In addition, a few days ago, an innate master broke into Nine Heavens Mountain alone. He had always felt that something was wrong. If there was a grudge between the 2 sects, it was not worth the risk to go up the mountain alone just to provoke the dignity of 9 heavens or to kill some 9 heavens disciples. Moreover, judging from the expressions of the Venerable Sword and the Master of 9 heavens at that time, they were obviously very shocked. They did not expect that someone would come. Perhaps this person was here for something. The Gilded Feather Saber. Ning Chen's gaze fixed on this name again. There was relatively little description of the Gilded Feather Drake. It was only said that it was the sharpest weapon in the world and was indestructible. If this item was really sharp enough to break through the boundary between realms, all these things could be explained. Then, the longevity banquet set up by the masters of the 4 extremes was not a feast at Hongmen. It was a diversion. Ning Chen suppressed the shock in his heart and left the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion directly. His judgment was still just a guess. However, he would rather believe that these hypotheses were true. There were many sects in the 4 extremes. They each had their own way of doing things. They were not monolithic. He could make good use of this to foil the masters of the 4 extremes. On Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji quietly looked at the white figure in the distance. She had set him free because she wanted to see what he would do at this time. She had to attend the longevity banquet of the Holy Land. Even if she did not fear the threat of the Holy Land, she still had to take 9 heavens into consideration. The Master of the Land and the King of Disasters seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. During the years when the Land Master was silent, the King of Disasters had been secretly threatening and roping in the Khanate experts of various sections. She was one of them. She had never let down her guard against the Palace of Eternal Life and the King of Disasters. This longevity banquet of the Holy Land was very likely another conspiracy led by the King of Disasters and the Land Master. On the peak and below the peak, Meng Xuanji and Ning Chen each had their own thoughts. Both of them knew some things, but they did not know everything. Just like how Ning Chen did not know that the Gilded Feather Drake really had the ability to break through the boundary between realms, Meng Xuanji did not know that the Land Master and the King of Disasters' goal was to obtain the Gilded Feather Drake and eventually achieve their ambition of invading the Divine Prefecture. Ning Chen was very clear that once the passage between the two realms was opened, the flames of war would rise everywhere. Not only for the divine prefecture, but also for the four extremes. If it really came to that, he would not be merciful. Even if he had to destroy the entire four extremes, he would not hesitate. Ning Chen walked towards the bamboo pavilion. On the way, he unexpectedly met someone. Chang Jiangli, the new direct disciple of the Nine Heavens sect master. He had heard of this woman before. She was a powerful innate expert, the only daughter of Chang Hen Heaven. Her talent was outstanding. At the age of 20, she had already stepped into the late stage of the ninth stage. However, this woman's murderous aura was very strong. Many disciples were intimidated by her. The two brushed past each other. Chang Jiangli suddenly stopped and turned her palm over. Ning Chen took a step back and avoided the palm. He frowned. "Miss Chang Jiangli, what do you mean by this?" Chang Jiangli's expression was cold. "I can feel that you are very dangerous." Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. This woman's intuition was really scary. Even Venerable Sword and the others could not see anything. This woman was actually so sure. Miss Chang Jiangli, people's intuition can often deceive them. Ning Chen did not stay for long. After he finished speaking, he continued walking towards the bamboo pavilion. Chang Jiangli's eyes flickered. After a moment, she also turned and left. In the bamboo pavilion, Ning Chen returned Yun Shisan's jade talisman and thanked him. Yun Shisan took the jade talisman and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Ning Chen, listen to me. Meng Zun looks cold and arrogant, but she is actually a reasonable person. As long as you are willing to lower your head, Meng Zun will definitely remove the separation and reunion death seal in your body." Ning Chen smiled and replied, "Don't worry, I know what to do." Now, it was not a matter of lowering his head to Meng Xianji. Although he did not know why Meng Xianji suspected him, she was definitely on guard against him. Yun Shisan sighed softly. She thought for a moment and handed the jade talisman over. She continued, "In a few days, I will go to the Holy Land with my teacher. We will need at least 10 days to come back. You can keep this jade talisman." Ning Chen did not take it. He said calmly, "No need. I also need time to practice the skills you gave me. I don't need this jade talisman for the time being." At this point, Ning Chen paused and asked, "By the way, did you find out who the person who broke into the main peak a few days ago was?" Yun Shisan shook her head and said, "No. The Nine Heavens rarely incur enmity with others. That person intentionally concealed his aura that day. It was very difficult to find out his identity." Ning Chen's face revealed a trace of disappointment. He said regretfully, "What a pity. It seems that after you and the 5 venerables leave, the Nine Heavens mountain will not be a safe place." After speaking, Ning Chen stood up and walked towards the door. When he was about to leave, he paused and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I'm not dissatisfied with the Nine Heavens mountain. I'm just a little scared. However, a big shot like that would probably not find trouble with us ordinary disciples for no reason." Yun Shisan fell silent. After a long time, her heart suddenly shook as if she had realized something. Just as she was about to speak, she realized that Ning Chen had already walked far away. Chapter 222. Yun Shisan got up and went to the Supreme Mystery Hall. When he saw the Nine Heavens sect leader, he told him his worries. The Nine Heavens sect leader's eyes flashed. He nodded and said, "You're right. Although the Nine Heavens mountain has a formation protecting it, after we leave, the defense will be greatly weakened. If that person really has ulterior motives, he might not be able to avoid the banquet this time." Yun Shisan could not hide his worry. He said, "Master, we can't take this risk." The Nine Heavens sect leader got up and ordered, send someone to invite the four venerables. Tell them there's something important to discuss. On the Xianji Peak, Ning Chen watched as the disciples of the main peak came up and invited Meng Xuanji to the Supreme Mystery Hall. Before Meng Xuanji left, she glanced at Ning Chen on the peak. Without saying anything, she took a step forward and disappeared. In the Qi Luo Palace, the flower venerables were teaching her new disciple the listening flower technique. After hearing the sect leader's summons, she carefully gave Yin Shuangshuang a few words before getting up and leaving. In the other two peaks, the sword venerables and the medicine venerables also went to the main peak. They were puzzled. It was so late. Why was the sect leader looking for them? In the Supreme Mystery Hall, the four venerables all arrived. Yun Shisan stood respectfully at the side without saying a word. The Nine Heavens sect leader told them about the matter and asked for their opinions. The medicine venerables frowned and said, no one would dare to refuse an invitation from the four venerables' holy lands. Even if he dares to refuse, wouldn't his identity be exposed if he does anything during the banquet? Not necessarily. The sword venerables shook his head and said, that day, that person hid his aura and came. We thought that he didn't want to expose his identity. But what if he doesn't care if his identity is exposed after he gets what he wants? You're saying that he's from the other three sects? Asked the medicine venerables. In this world, besides the Holy Lands, only the Immortal Ascension Realm, the Cherishing Flower Palace, and the Longevity Hall had the confidence to fight against the Nine Heavens. It's possible, answered the Sword Venerables. Qi Luo, what do you think? Asked the Nine Heavens sect leader. It's not important who he is. What we need to consider most now is his goal, said the Venerables. The Forbidden Tome of the Nine Heavens, the Separation and Reunion Pill, or the Golden Feather Centipede. Other than that, there's nothing else, Meng Xuanji said calmly. The Patriarch of the Continent of the Nine Clouds thought for a moment and said, the Separation and Reunion Pills are kept by the Master Apothecaries, and the Forbidden Books of the Continent of the Nine Clouds are with me. You can take them with you, but the Golden Feather Lance controls the Qi of the Continent of the Nine Clouds. You can't take it out easily. It is indeed troublesome. The Sword Venerable nodded. At the same time, on the Xuanji Peak, Ning Chen, who had been quietly cultivating, had finally taken another step forward. He had successfully entered the second grade of the natal stage. As the spiritual energy entered his body, the three cyclones of heaven, earth, and life in his Dantian sea of qi expanded several times and spun rapidly. In the Supreme Mystery Hall, Meng Xuanji sensed something at the same time. She looked at the Xuanji Peak and narrowed her beautiful eyes. What's wrong? Venerable Flower asked softly. I'm fine. Meng Xuanji regained her senses and replied. After another breakthrough, Ning Chen could feel the separation and reunion death seal in his body even more clearly. The shackles that Meng Xuanji had placed on him seemed to grow stronger with his cultivation. In the Supreme Mystery Hall, the five venerables had been discussing for a long time. Meng Xuanji returned after midnight and looked at Ning Chen, who was still cultivating on the peak. She stared at him seriously for a long time. She would not mistake this aura. However, she felt that something was wrong. This person did not seem to have any ulterior motives. The longevity banquet was just around the corner. Whether this person had a problem or not would be revealed very soon. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. The five venerables moved and left one after another. The Xuanji Peak became empty. After Meng Xuanji left, no one else came up. Only Ning Chen was left on the huge Xuanji Peak. On the peak, Ning Chen continued to cultivate day after day. He did not care about anything else. He had already warned the Nine Heavens that it would be too disappointing if someone took advantage of this opportunity to attack again. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The Nine Heavens mountain was as peaceful as usual. Nothing unexpected happened. The Sword Venerables and the Flower Venerables, who were standing quietly outside the 9 heavens, did not see the person they wanted to see. They could only leave. The longevity banquet was about to begin. They could not delay it any longer. On the 4th day, everything was calm and tranquil. On the 5th day, the sun rose as usual. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens did the same as usual. They swept the ground, practiced sword techniques, practiced cultivation techniques, and did their own things in an orderly manner. However, at that moment, outside of the 9 heavens mountain, a rumbling sound spread in the air. The great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain started shaking violently. Everybody's expression changed drastically. Ning Chen was standing at the top of the mountain, looking at a person in black clothes in the distance. He narrowed his eyes. What was going to happen had finally happened. In front of the great deployment spell, a person in black clothes was standing there calmly. His right hand was on the great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain. A powerful chi kept shaking the deployment spell, destroying it. The person in black clothes had obviously come prepared. His blue lights were dazzling. The great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain was about to collapse. Boom! After a few breaths, the great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain collapsed and disappeared. The black silhouette quickly crossed the stairway of ascension and moved towards the main peak. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain immediately formed a deployment spell. Sword lights dashed to the skies to block the intruder. The sword spell of the 9 heavens layer cultivators couldn't resist it. Everything was in vain. The person in black clothes waved his hand and blue light spread in all directions. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens were blown away and crashed onto the ground like broken kites. Chang Jiangli appeared, a black and red sword in his hand. He turned into a beam of light and pierced towards the cultivator in front of him. You want to die? The dark figure snorted coldly, recognizing the sword that was rushing over. He flipped his palm and rolled up the chi of heaven and earth. The silent soul sword instantly stopped, unable to move forward. I'll spare your life for your father's sake. Move back. Li Huarong punched Chang Jiangli and pushed him back. Then, he walked towards the Supreme Mystery Temple step by step. In the distance, Ning Chen was watching the battle. He was waiting for the Zun cultivators of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain. Li Huarong entered the Supreme Mystery Temple and glanced around with his spiritual awareness. As he was about to go forwards, his expression suddenly changed. At that moment, the Supreme Mystery Peak vibrated and a powerful chi was awakened. 4 beams of golden light shot towards the intruders. Li Huarong quickly retreated, but it was too late. The 4 beams of golden light were already there. There was a loud bang and the black silhouette was blown away. Blood stained the ground. In the next moment, 4 golden silhouettes appeared and stood in the sky. They were shining like gods. Oh! On the peak, Ning Chen was surprised. His eyes flashed with admiration. If he guessed correctly, the 4 Zun cultivators had used the fortune of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain to create clones. In front of the Supreme Mystery Temple, Li Huarong steadied himself and looked at the 4 golden silhouettes in the sky. He was shocked. The 4 clones moved their feet and pressed forward. Their majestic aura surged, and even the sky and earth changed color. The golden light covered the sky. Although they were just clones, they were still very powerful. Li Huarong fought against the 4 of them alone. 3 of them attacked and 7 of them defended. He wanted to delay as much as possible. However, the 4's attacks were fierce and difficult to resist. His black clothes were soon covered in blood. Wan Fengchen, what are you waiting for? Li Huarong roared with a mournful expression. Ha! There was a calm and indifferent laugh. Between heaven and earth, the wind and clouds rolled. A bright red silhouette walked out. His face was handsome, and his blood-red hair danced in the air. As soon as he appeared, the space distorted violently. The folding fan scattered and turned into a long and thin saber light. It was as red as blood and extremely beautiful. On the peak, Ning Chen's expression changed. What a powerful young man. Today, I return the favor of the temple master. As soon as he finished speaking, the rainbow saber flashed in front of everyone's eyes like lightning. The bright red silhouette stopped and the 4 golden clones quickly dispersed. Before the disciples on the peak could react, the blood-red saber in Wan Fengchen's hand had disappeared and turned back into a red folding fan. Li Huarong was very upset. If the temple master had not expected this and left a backup plan, he might have died here today. However, in the end, the golden feather centipede still belonged to the immortal hall. Li Huarong walked towards the supreme mystery hall again. However, at this moment, he felt a chill on his back and immediately jumped forward subconsciously. An invisible sword intent swept past silently. The white stone floor was as fragile as tofu at this moment. In the blink of an eye, a deep and bottomless gully was created. Wan Fengchen was slightly surprised. He looked at the peak in the distance and a strange look flashed in his eyes. 9 Cloud Mountain actually hid such a strong person. On the Xuanji peak, Ning Chen waved his hand and sword qi gathered in front of him. In the blink of an eye, the sword qi swept out and once again swept towards the main peak. Li Huarong could not hide the anger on his face. He forcefully raised his body and blue light surged like waves, turning into an airtight wall of qi that blocked in front of him. Thousands of sword qi were blocked and could not move forward. It was a stalemate. A cold smile appeared on Ning Chen's face. With a point of his sword finger, an ordinary sword intent swept out. In the next moment, the sky changed color. Between heaven and earth, a terrifying sword intent appeared out of nowhere. As it moved forward, its power became more and more terrifying. In the end, it turned into a sword that could split the sky and slash down. The blue wall of qi shattered. Li Huarong's expression changed drastically. He wanted to dodge, but it was too late. The sword pierced through his body. His body, which had been heavily injured for a long time, could no longer withstand the sword. With a bang, he flew backwards, blood spurting out, spraying dozens of feet away. On the main peak, the disciples of the 9 Cloud Mountain who were lying on the ground looked at each other. The confusion in their eyes was even more intense. What had happened? Ning Chen withdrew his hand and looked at the red figure in the distance, quietly waiting for his decision. Wan Fengchen also looked in the direction of the Xuanji peak. After a moment, the red figure dispersed and disappeared. On the Xuanji peak, the red light flashed and Wan Fengchen walked out. Looking at the person in front of him, his eyes flashed with surprise. 2nd grade acquired stage, what a strange young man. I am Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen. Wan Fengchen thought for a moment and confirmed that he had never heard this name before. I'll remember it. If fate wills it, we'll meet again. Wan Fengchen nodded. In the next moment, the red figure dissipated and turned into a beam of light that flew away. Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He also remembered this name. He was very sure that they would meet again in the future. He just did not know if the next time they met would be enemies or friends. Chapter 223. In the polar region of the western border, the wind was fierce. The visible storm swept up the sand and destroyed everything. Prince Yen walked in with Aman. The green and red swords flew out from the sword rack and circled around Aman. The sword intent turned into circles of ripples and swept away all the sand. In the wind, the black sandstorm blocked most of the view. It was hard to see what was in front of them. Prince Yen walked forward step by step, not affected by the sandstorm at all. Aman's pretty little face didn't show any signs of fear. She looked left and right before obediently following behind. The storm was blocked by the sword in tent and couldn't enter. The small circle became the safest place in the polar region of the western border. After looking for a long time, a man curiously reached out, wanting to touch the sand outside. "Don't be naughty," Prince Yen said softly. A man immediately retracted her hand. She put her hands behind her back in embarrassment and continued to walk forward obediently. The two kept walking forward. After walking for a long time, the storm grew bigger and bigger. The black sand swirled in the wind, forming huge whirlpools. Clanging sounds came from the green and red swords. It was the sound caused by the sand breaking through the sword in tent and hitting the swords. In the deepest part of the polar region of the western border, the storm had reached a terrifying level. Even the green and red swords were starting to struggle. In front, Prince Yen waved his hand and the Zhiga sword flew out. The three swords covered the sky and protected A Man. In that moment of distraction, a piece of sand brushed past Prince Yan's face. Immediately, blood dripped down and dripped onto his green robe. The horror of the sandstorm was on full display at this moment. The four polar regions of the four extremes were full of danger. Even strong cultivators of the three disasters didn't dare to enter, not to mention A Man, who was a burden. Prince Yen was half a step away from the three disasters. However, realms weren't absolute sometimes. Just like the sword in Barren City. Even if he hadn't reached the Khanate realm yet, every strong cultivator of the three disasters still feared him. Of course, there were very few people like him in the world. If they existed, they would be legends. On the Xuanji Peak, Ning Chen didn't know that Prince Yen had brought A Man to this strange realm. He continued to cultivate quietly every day. The news that the main peak had been attacked was sent to the Nine Cloud Sect's patriarch by a secret technique. The five venerables quickly came back from the Holy Land. When they saw the main peak that was full of holes, they didn't look good. The two disciples explained everything in detail, including Wan Feng Chen's appearance and the mysterious expert's help. In front of the Supreme Mystery Hall, Changjiang Li's gaze was fixed in the direction of the Four Stars Peak. Her intuition told her that the person who had acted that day was Ning Chen of the Four Stars Peak. Li Huarong was brought out. His face was ghastly pale, and his aura was extremely weak. There was a terrifying sword wound on his left chest that pierced through his heart meridian, and half of his heart had been destroyed. If it wasn't for the strong vitality of the congenital realm, he would have died long ago. However, everyone knew that he was already crippled. The remaining sword insight on the sword mark had already destroyed Li Huarong's vitality, and it was impossible to save him. The sword venerable stepped forward and touched the sword mark on the wound. In an instant, a small wound appeared on the tip of his finger. He had been injured by the residual sword intent. What a sharp sword! The apothecary and venerable flower narrowed their eyes. Apart from the few people at the longevity banquet, they couldn't think of anyone else in the world who had such a strong sword cultivation. He's already injured to this extent. The longevity hall definitely won't let this matter rest. We have to be careful in the next few days, said the Nine Cloud Sect's headmaster gravely. What exactly does the longevity hall want? Asked the apothecary, frowning. That's not important. Just be careful, said Meng Xuanji calmly. I'm going back first. With that, Meng Xuanji walked away gracefully, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Let's go as well. The venerable flower and apothecary sighed softly and also turned to leave. Perhaps this would be their last peaceful days. Facing that disaster king, the Nine Cloud Sect wasn't confident that they could stop him. Meng Xuanji appeared on the Four Stars Peak. Seeing Ning Chen still cultivating on the peak, her eyes flickered. A second-grade congenital realm cultivator without any concealment. Just what was going on? And that strange aura. Just what was his relationship with the longevity hall? Meng Xuanji thought about it for a long time, but she still couldn't figure out the reason. No matter how she thought about it, it didn't make sense. Could it really just be a coincidence? But no matter how coincidental it was, the aura of phoenix blood shouldn't appear on an ordinary person. Meng Xuanji returned to the Four Stars Hall and stopped thinking about it. In the next few days, the Disaster King might come to the Nine Cloud sect. She had to recover her cultivation to its peak as soon as possible. Days passed. The Nine Cloud sect remained silent. They didn't mention anything about what had happened a few days ago, as if nothing had happened. Li Huarong was locked in a stone room, using pills to hang on to his last breath. He couldn't wake up, but he couldn't die. Unexpectedly, the Longevity Hall also acted as if nothing had happened. They didn't care about Li Huarong's life or death. No one thought that the Longevity Hall was silent because of a guilty conscience. With that Disaster King overseeing it, that was the biggest reason. The more the Longevity Hall remained silent, the more the Nine Cloud sect master and Meng Xuanji felt that something was wrong. At that moment, a bolt from the blue came. The Immortal Ascension realm was destroyed overnight. From the sect master to the ordinary disciples, no one survived. The Yin-Yang Jade was stolen. The entire Immortal Mountain became a land of death. When the news reached the Nine Clouds, Yin Shuangshuang fainted on the spot. Everyone thought of the same person at the same time. The Disaster King. In the world, other than the leaders of the sacred grounds, only the Disaster King and the Longevity Hall had the power to destroy the entire Immortal Ascension realm overnight. However, for Immortal Ascension realm Xiantian experts, plus the Yin-Yang Jade as the core of the Four Symbols Demon Sealing Formation, should be able to fight even against the three disasters. How could they be defeated so miserably? In the Tingzhu Pavilion, Ning Chen heard the news. After thinking for a moment, he said calmly, "There's a traitor." Yun Shisan's body shook. He was immediately awakened. This was the only explanation. Yun Shisan looked at the former with a trace of doubt in his heart. Last time, it was Ning Chen's careless words that made him think of many things. This time, it was Ning Chen who reminded him again. The first time might be a coincidence, but the second time, it couldn't be a coincidence. A strange look flashed in Yun Shisan's eyes. For the first time, he had doubts about Ning Chen's identity. "It's getting late. I'll go back first." Ning Chen saw the suspicion and didn't explain anything. He got up and left. He wasn't worried that Yun Shisan would think too much. Yun Shisan wasn't the only one who had doubts about him. Meng Xuanji and the woman called Chang Jiangli were also suspicious of his identity. However, suspicions were just suspicions. As long as he didn't reveal his identity, the three of them could only guess. Right now, he was more concerned about the leaders of the four extreme realms and the Disaster King. These three disasters were the source of all his worries. He had to be careful. The Disaster King of the Longevity Hall had already started to move. This wasn't good news for him. The Immortal Ascension Realm, Nine Cloud Mountain, and Cherishing Flower Palace were the greatest powers to keep the Longevity Hall in check. Now that the Immortal Ascension Realm had been destroyed, it would probably be Nine Cloud Mountain or Cherishing Flower Palace's turn next. The Disaster King clearly wanted to unify the four extreme realms and suppress all the disharmonious forces before spreading the flames of war to the Divine Continent. A war between the two realms would cause endless disasters. It was impossible for everyone to agree. The ones most likely to oppose were the Immortal Ascension Realm, Nine Cloud Mountain, and Cherishing Flower Palace. The Disaster King's actions were to prevent future troubles. If the three sects were destroyed, no other sect in the four extreme realms would dare to oppose this war between the two realms. The second day after the Immortal Ascension Realm had been destroyed, the Sacred Land sent an emissary to investigate. Everyone knew who had done it. However, without evidence, no one dared to provoke the Longevity Hall. 5 days later, the palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace sent a disciple to invite Meng Xuanji over to discuss important matters. Before Meng Xuanji left, she glanced at the young figure on the mountain peak and said, "Come with me." With that, Meng Xuanji didn't give Ning Chen any chance to speak. With a wave of her hand, she turned into a streak of light and left with him. The Cherishing Flower Palace was more than 3,000 kilometers away from Nine Cloud Mountain. There were countless famous mountains and great rivers in between. The palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace had clearly invited them to discuss the Longevity Hall. The massacre of the Immortal Ascension realm in a single night had greatly shocked the two sections. No one wanted to become the next target. Forming an alliance was their only choice. Neither sect had any strong cultivators who could fight against the Disaster King. However, with the help of the Joyous Union Bell and the Gilded Feather Centipede, they still had a chance of victory. However, they had to be wary of a tragedy like the one in the Immortal Ascension realm. After many days of consideration, they had also guessed that a traitor might have appeared in the Immortal Ascension realm. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been wiped out in a single night. The Cherishing Flower Palace was an all-female sect. Like the Nine Cloud Mountain, they had 5 Xiantian cultivators. Among them, the one with the highest cultivation was the current palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace. As soon as the two of them entered the Cherishing Flower Palace, they were respectfully received by the disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace. The palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace quickly appeared. She was a beautiful woman who looked to be in her 30s. She still retained the grace of her youth. When the palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace saw Ning Chen beside Meng Xuanji, she was slightly stunned. She hadn't thought that Meng Xuanji would bring someone else here. Ning Chen sat quietly to the side, drinking tea. He didn't say anything. A disciple softly whispered a few words into the palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace's ear. Only then did the latter react and realize the identity of the young man in front of her. After the apprenticeship ceremony at Nine Cloud Mountain, news of this person had spread like wildfire. She had also heard of him. She had never understood why Meng Xuanji would forcefully accept an ordinary person with ordinary talent as a disciple. The palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace unconsciously glanced at Ning Chen a few more times. She wanted to see what was so special about this person. Ning Chen didn't feel uncomfortable at all. He sat there quietly and drank his tea. He didn't say anything. He could look at her however he wanted. Chapter 224. Palace Mistress Xihua looked at him for a long time, but she couldn't find anything special about the young man. His talent was average, and his cultivation wasn't even worth mentioning. The only thing that was worth praising was his determination. However, in this world where strength was respected, without strength, everything was meaningless. Just like the massacre in the Immortal Ascension realm. Everyone guessed that it was the Palace of Immortality's doing, but without evidence, no one dared to say it out loud. The sacred lands were envoys, and they wouldn't listen to their side of the story. Only with enough evidence could the sacred lands intervene and punish the Palace of Immortality. The disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace were brewing tea at the side. Their young and beautiful faces were filled with curiosity. They looked at the legendary Dream Lord of the Nine Heavens, then looked at the young man who was quietly drinking tea. Ning Chen drank cup after cup of tea. He wasn't very interested in the conversation between Palace Mistress Xihua and Meng Xuanji. The only choice between the two sects was to form an alliance. Everything else was just pleasantries. The young girl who was pouring tea at the side was extremely busy. She was only 16 or 17 years old, so she didn't think too much. She only listened to her master's orders and served the guests of the Cherishing Flower Palace. The art of tea was an art that was easy to learn but not easy to master. Although the disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace were still young, their level was already not low. The tea entered his mouth. It was sweet and refreshing, and had a lingering aftertaste. It was intoxicating. Ning Chen couldn't help but think of the tea that Fan Lingyue had brewed in the pavilion where the armies of Great Xia and Northern Meng had faced each other. As he thought about it, he drank cup after cup of tea. Perhaps, he would never be able to find that taste again in this life. In the instant that Ning Chen was absent-minded, his aura unconsciously changed. Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Xihua looked over at the same time. There was a flash of light in their eyes. Something was wrong. Sensing their gazes, Ning Chen immediately restrained his thoughts. He regained his rationality and calmness, suppressing all his emotions at the bottom of his heart. Seeing that his aura had returned to normal, the suspicion in Meng Xuanji's eyes didn't decrease in the slightest. The feeling just now couldn't be wrong. This was definitely not the pressure that a second-grade Hotian cultivator should have. A strange look also flashed through Palace Mistress Shihua's eyes. She had misjudged him. This young man wasn't simple. Palace Mistress Shihua temporarily suppressed the idea of forming an alliance. The lesson of the immortal Ascension realm was still fresh in her mind. She didn't want to repeat it. She trusted Meng Xuanji, but she didn't trust this young man in front of her. Venerated dream, all of you must be tired after traveling for such a long time. Why don't you rest for the night and discuss the other matters tomorrow? Palace Master Shihua spoke with a gentle smile. Meng Xuanji could more or less guess what Palace Mistress Shihua was thinking. She stood up and said, "Thank you. Wang Yu, the two of you are responsible for properly entertaining these two honored guests. Do not neglect them." Palace Master Shihua looked to the two disciples by her side and instructed them. Yes. Two women with similar appearances walked out. Soon after, they walked in front of the two and softly said, "Please." Ning Chen put down his teacup reluctantly and followed the two disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace out of the hall. In the west wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace, because Ning Chen was a man, he was arranged to stay in a small courtyard by himself. It was quite a distance away from Meng Xuanji's residence. As night fell, Daylily brought over the flower dew that was unique to the Palace of Cherishing Flower. When she saw Ning Chen standing in front of the house in a daze, she placed the flower dew on the stone table in the courtyard. "Young Master Ning, please," Daylily said softly. "Thank you." Ning Chen came back to his senses and smiled courteously. Daylily quietly stood to the side, not saying anything as she waited for orders. Ning Chen picked up the flower dew and took a small sip before putting it down. He glanced at the quiet woman beside him and asked, "You're called Daylily?" "Yes." Daylily gently nodded in response. "It's a very good name," Ning Chen said. "In my hometown, there is a type of daylily that often blooms in the mountains. Its flowers are light yellow. Every time my son travels, my mother will pick a stalk of daylily and plant it in the courtyard. She prays that my son will be safe and worry-free." Now, all that was left was regret. Ning Chen looked at the distant horizon, and a light flashed through his eyes. Was his mother in his hometown still in the courtyard, waiting for her son's return every day? Daylily quietly listened. After a long time, she softly said, "Daylily will remember what young master has said." Ning Chen came back to his senses and softly laughed. "I'm just speaking nonsense. Don't take it seriously." After saying this, Ning Chen finished the flower dew on the table and handed the cup and tray over. He said, "Thank you for your hospitality. It's already very late. You should go back and rest." Daylily took it and bowed. She didn't say anything and quietly left. The bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down a cold waterfall. The figure in the courtyard quietly stood there, not moving at all. From afar, it was so abrupt. Even though it was standing in this world, it still seemed out of place. Inside Meng Xuanji's room, Palace Mistress Shihua had been sitting there for a long time. No one knew what they were talking about. However, before leaving, Palace Mistress Xihua reminded her, that young man called Ning Chen is not simple. You have to be careful. I know. Meng Xuanji nodded. After Palace Mistress Xihua left, Meng Xuanji walked out of her room and looked at Ning Chen's small courtyard. When she swept her spiritual sense over it, she was suddenly stunned. The courtyard in the west wing was empty. There was not a single person in it. Meng Xuanji's figure flashed and she arrived in Ning Chen's courtyard. She looked around and narrowed her eyes. In the night, a white figure streaked across the night sky, heading north. This was the first time Ning Chen had used his full strength after entering the Xiantian realm. Everything in the world disappeared behind him in the blink of an eye. Northern region, Immortal Ascension Realm. The entire mountain peak was filled with scars from a great battle. Blood dyed the mountain peak red. Even from far away, one could smell the pungent smell of blood. Ning Chen appeared at the foot of the mountain. He didn't stop. With a step, he disappeared. At the top of the mountain peak, a red figure stood there quietly. He looked around at the miserable state of the surroundings. After a long time, he sighed. As the white light flashed, Ning Chen stopped and frowned slightly. It was him. He hadn't expected them to meet so quickly. Wan Fengchen turned around. When he saw the young man in front of him, surprise flashed through his eyes. It's you. This world is really too small. Ning Chen sighed. Do you want to fight? Wan Fengchen asked softly. The red folding fan in his hand turned into a thin, blood-red blade. I'm not in the mood to fight. Ning Chen shook his head. Ha! Wan Fengchen chuckled. With a wave of his hand, the blade turned back into a red folding fan. I've heard rumors about you. But with your strength, Dream Sovereign's incomplete separation death seal shouldn't be able to control you. Why are you still on the Jade Pearl Peak? Asked Wan Fengchen curiously. I don't have anywhere to go. It doesn't matter where I go, said Ning Chen indifferently. Ning Chen looked at the red-robed young man and asked, I've also heard rumors about you. I heard you once challenged the palace master of the Longevity Hall. What happened? I lost. I lost very miserably. I almost died in the Longevity Hall. Wan Fengchen didn't try to hide anything, and he lightly smiled. However, the Disaster King stopped after the last attack, so I owed him a favor. It wasn't until a few days ago that I repaid that favor on the Tai Xian Peak. Right, why did you come here? Do you know anyone here? Asked Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen shook his head. No, I just came to take a look. Did you see anything? Asked Wan Fengchen. The Longevity Hall is stronger than I thought, sighed Ning Chen. There were at least 10 different Xiantian realm auras here, and there were only 4 Xiantian realm cultivators. In other words, the Longevity Hall had sent out at least 6 Xiantian realm cultivators. Wan Fengchen looked at the miserable situation below the peak. After a moment of silence, he said, the sacred land will deal with this. Ning Chen laughed mockingly. This isn't the first time I've heard this. You all seem to believe in the sacred land. Yunshisan and Little Stone had both said the same thing. If he didn't know that the master of the 4 extreme realms and the Disaster King had already secretly colluded to conquer the divine continent, he might have believed them too. Wan Fengchen turned his head and looked at the person beside him. He couldn't help but frown. Why do you have such a strong opinion of the sacred land? Nothing. It's getting late. I'm going back. See you later. With that, Ning Chen took a step forward and turned into a streak of white light. Wan Fengchen looked at the departing figure. His eyes flashed. He hadn't seen wrong. This person didn't have a good impression of the sacred land. A cold wind blew past. On the peak of the mountain, the red clothes scattered and disappeared. He hadn't returned for many years. This time, the sacred land's emissary had come. He needed to meet him and ask him how the sacred land was going to deal with the immortal Ascension realm. Ning Chen returned to the west wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace. As soon as he walked into the courtyard, he saw Meng Xuanji quietly waiting there. Her beautiful face was cold. "May I ask where you went last night?" Meng Xuanji asked coldly. "I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk," Ning Chen replied calmly. Meng Xuanji's eyes grew colder. Just as she was about to speak, she heard soft footsteps outside the courtyard. "Lord Meng, Lord Ning, the palace master invites you." Wang Yu walked over and bowed respectfully to Meng Xuanji. Meng Xuanji could only take back her words and walk out of the courtyard. Ning Chen followed. When he passed by Wang Yu, he said softly, "Thank you." Wang Yu smiled gently. Her smile was very faint. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Palace Master Shihua was already waiting in the Azure Flower Palace. When she saw the three of them arrive, she frowned. "Wang Yu, I only asked you to pass on a message. Why did you take so long?" "Please forgive me, Palace Master. It's my fault." Wang Yu stepped forward and softly apologized. "Don't do it again. You can leave." Palace Master Shihua clearly didn't want to blame Wang Yu too much. Wang Yu bowed, then turned around and smiled at Ning Chen. She then left the palace. "Meng Xuanji, let's talk about the alliance between the Cherishing Flower Palace and Nine Firmament Mountain," said Palace Master Shihua. "I'm all ears," said Meng Xuanji calmly. To the side, Ning Chen's lips curled into a cold smile. It seemed that he had been treated as a fool. Even the act was in front of him. Chapter 225. Inside the Azure Flower Palace, Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Shihua were discussing the matter of forming an alliance, as well as how they would deal with the Palace of Longevity in the future. When Ning Chen heard these words from the side, he didn't believe a single word. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. A golden streak of light tore through the sky and arrived at the Azure Flower Palace. "Revered dream, return quickly." Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Shihua's expressions changed. Even Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. Something had happened. Due to the urgency of the matter, Meng Xuanji didn't have time to say anything. She took a step forward and disappeared. "Wang Yu, bring our honored guest to rest," Palace Mistress Shihua stood up and ordered. "Yes." Forgotten Sorrow walked over and respectfully said, "Young master, please." Ning Chen didn't say anything. He turned around and walked out of the hall. In the west wing, after Worryless brought Ning Chen in, she stood quietly at the side, waiting for orders. Ning Chen looked in the direction of Nine Cloud Mountain. His eyes flickered. If he guessed correctly, the Longevity Hall had made a move against Nine Cloud Mountain. There were 4 Xiantian cultivators in the Nine Clouds. Unless it was the Longevity Hall, they wouldn't be in such a hurry to summon Meng Xuanji back. He hadn't expected the Longevity Hall to strike again so soon. After the Immortal Ascension stage incident, all the sects were on guard against the Longevity Hall. Moreover, the 4 extreme holy lands had already sent out an envoy to investigate this matter. Regardless of what agreement the masters of the 4 extremities and the master of the Longevity Hall had secretly reached, the 4 extremities' sacred grounds had always maintained a holy and just position in the 4 extremities' sacred grounds. On the surface, the Longevity Hall's actions were undoubtedly a challenge to the dignity of the sacred grounds. Worry flashed across Ning Chen's eyes. Now, the Holy Land and the Longevity Hall were one in the light and one in the dark. Be it in terms of reputation or absolute strength, they were not something that the other major sects could contend against. It was not impossible for the 4 extremes to unite. The most troublesome thing was that the sects of the 4 extremities did not know about the ambitions of the hallowed grounds and the Longevity Hall. At the side, Daylily handed him a cup of tea and said softly, "If young master is worried, you can go back and take a look." Ning Chen took the teacup and his body trembled. He looked at the former in disbelief. How could this be? After a short period of shock, Ning Chen truly looked at Daylily for the first time. All this time, he had not paid much attention to this gentle and quiet woman beside him. Now, it seemed that he had misjudged her. Miss Worryless, please keep this a secret. Ning Chen's expression was solemn as he pleaded. Young master, please come back quickly. Daylily smiled gently and said softly. Ning Chen nodded. Then, his feet moved, and he quickly disappeared into the distance. Daylily turned around and tidied up the teacups and empty plates on the stone table. Then, she quietly left the courtyard. At the Nine Clouds Mountain, one person appeared and 3 inborn experts appeared. The entire Nine Clouds Mountain was on high alert. Inside the flowing light armor, a pair of emotionless eyes stared at the 4 inborn experts in front of him without any emotion. In the depths of the Nine Heavens Mountain, the gilded feather centipede shone brightly, ready to fly out at any moment. The 4 Zune masters of the continent of the 9 clouds looked more serious than ever. If they couldn't stop him, it would be a real disaster. I'll say it again. Hand over the golden feather tail, and I'll spare you this time, the Disaster King said indifferently. Impossible, said the 9 Firmament sect leader. Impossibly stupid. The Disaster King coldly snorted and raised his right palm. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed color. Thunder rumbled as dark clouds covered the sky. It was an extremely frightening sight. Swish! In the depths of Nine Clouds Mountain, a golden beam of light slashed down. It pierced through space and arrived in front of the Disaster King. An enormous rumbling sound rang out. The world's sharpest weapon faced off against an expert who transcended the 5 tribulations, a heaven-shocking strike that completely shattered space. The Disaster King waved his hand, scattering the shockwaves. The flowing light armor shone brightly. It wasn't damaged at all. The 4 inborn experts' expressions were extremely ugly. Could it be that the Nine Clouds Mountain really was doomed this time? The Disaster King walked forward step by step. His divine might was unrivaled. At this moment, multicolored light condensed in the sky. A peerless figure walked out. Her slender hand slapped out. The Disaster King also flipped his palm. With a bang, the ground beneath them cracked. Meng Xuanji, as expected, you've already passed the 5th tribulation, said the Disaster King. Are you very surprised? Asked Meng Xuanji coldly. I'm a bit surprised, but that's all, said the Disaster King indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, the Disaster King waved his right hand. Thunder rumbled in the sky as an ancient mirror carved with complex runes slowly appeared. Green light lingered around it and sprinkled down, shocking the minds of everyone present. Reincarnation Mirror. The 9 Cloud sect's leader, Sword Zune, and the others' hearts sank. They hadn't thought the Disaster King would even bring out the Reincarnation Mirror. It seemed he was determined to destroy the 9 Clouds Mountain. Stop! The space between them stirred as a purple-robed middle-aged man appeared. He held a 4-colored token in his hand as he stood in front of them. Everyone present was a true leader of a sect. They naturally recognized the talisman in the purple-robed middle-aged man's hand. The Holy Land's emissary had finally arrived. Disaster King, you're overstepping your boundaries, shouted the purple-robed middle-aged man. The Disaster King remained unmoved. Today, even if the Holy Land intervenes, it won't change the fate of the 9 Clouds Mountain. Is that so? What if you add me in? A red light flashed, and a red-robed figure appeared. His blood-red hair fluttered in the wind. A bright red saber light appeared. It was so dazzling that people didn't dare look directly at it. The Disaster King narrowed his eyes. Wan Feng Chen, don't think that just because you survived once, you can survive a second time. I can try, replied Wan Feng Chen seriously. Palace Master, there's a change in the longevity pool. At that moment, a silhouette appeared. The Disaster King's expression changed slightly. Retreat. The three Xiantian cultivators who hadn't come out the entire time quickly retreated. Meng Xuanji's eyes flashed coldly. The Long Life Temple had already shed all pretense of cordiality. If nothing unexpected happened, they would come back very quickly. Many thanks, Holy Emissary, said the Continent of the Nine Clouds headmaster politely. The Four Extreme Holy Emissary shook his head. It's my duty. I wouldn't have thought that the Disaster King would be so arrogant. He even dares ignore the Holy Land's orders. Wan Fengchen didn't wait for the Sword Saint and the others to thank him before disappearing. Outside of the Continent of the Nine Clouds, Ning Chen was calmly standing on a cliff. He looked at the Four Extreme Holy Emissary in front of the Supreme Mystery Temple. The Holy Land had finally intervened. He wanted to see how the Four Extreme Holy Emissary and the Long Life Temple would continue acting. After a long time, Ning Chen left, and the cliff became calm again. There was no one else there. Ning Chen appeared in the western wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace. Not long after, Worryless walked over with a cup of flower dew. She gently placed it on the stone table. Sir, please. Many thanks. Ning Chen raised the cup and drank a mouthful. He looked at the woman in front of him and asked, Miss Worryless, can you tell me how you saw through it? He could tell that Worryless' cultivation was only at the 6th rank. In this era where geniuses were everywhere, she really couldn't be considered outstanding. However, this seemingly ordinary and gentle woman had greatly shocked him. Worryless smiled faintly. She didn't say anything and just stood there quietly. Her body quickly merged with heaven and earth, as if she would disappear at any moment. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. A Tao physique. There really was such a physique in the world. Originally, he had thought that the Ghost Woman and Underworld Child's ghost physique and underworld physique were already ridiculous enough. He hadn't thought that there would be a Tao physique. Since when had these rare physiques become so common? The biggest difference between innate and acquired was the ability to use the energy of heaven and earth. However, the Tao physique was an exception. Those who possessed the Tao physique were born with a strong affinity for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Their cultivation and realm were never directly proportional. In other words, this gentle and quiet woman before him might be in existence with abnormally terrifying combat strength. Excuse me. Ning Chen stood up and smiled bitterly. Fortunately, he hadn't offended this woman. Otherwise, he would be in deep trouble. Sir, you're too polite. Worryless still had a calm smile on her face as she replied. A thought suddenly flashed through Ning Chen's mind. He asked with a strange expression, Miss Worryless, Worryless wouldn't also have a Tao physique, right? The two of them looked very similar. They were obviously sisters. If another Tao physique appeared, he would really want to bang his head against a wall. Worryless shook her head lightly and said, no. Only then did Ning Chen breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there were still more ordinary people like him in the world. Sir, please rest. Worryless will leave first. Worryless tidied up the cup on the stone table and bowed gracefully. Then, she walked out of the courtyard. Ning Chen breathed a sigh of relief again. If possible, he really didn't want to face someone who possessed the Tao physique. From a certain point of view, the Tao physique was the most terrifying physique in the world. Even though it wasn't like the ghost physique or the underworld physique, which had an undying body, the Tao physique's ability to sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was too frightening. When it attacked, it was like fighting against heaven and earth. It was truly not something a human could do. He had managed to hide the fact that he had already stepped into the Xiantian realm from Meng Xuanji, Honorable Sword, Palace Mistress Cherishing Flower, and the others. However, Worryless had seen through it with a single glance. One could imagine just how frightening the affinity a Tao physique had with heaven and earth. Perhaps this was a good thing. With an additional Tao physique, the cherishing flower palace would become stronger. If the palace of immortality came, they would also encounter quite a bit of trouble. However, the prerequisite for all of this was that the cherishing flower palace was against starting a war between the two realms. Otherwise, the existence of the Tao physique would instead be a terrifying threat to the divine continent. Right now, the greatest variable was the Four Extremes sacred ground. The Palace of Immortality's strength made these large sects somewhat fearful. As the only sect that could contend against or even punish the Palace of Immortality, the Four Extremes sacred ground was bound to become the leader that everyone expected. He still couldn't tell whether the master of the Four Extremes sacred ground and the Disaster King were planning to use force to unify the Four Extremes sacred ground or use the Palace of Immortality's calamity to force the large sects to submit to the sacred ground. Both methods had their pros and cons. The former would allow the Four Extremes sacred ground to unify completely, and there would be no other voices. However, it would also consume a lot of power. Although the latter method would preserve the strength of the Four Extremes sacred ground to the greatest extent, when the war between the two realms began in the future, it was unknown how many large sects would continue to listen to the sacred ground's commands. Chapter 226. In the next few days, Meng Xuanji seemed to have forgotten about Ning Chen. She left him alone in the cherishing flower palace, not caring about him at all. Palace mistress Cherishing Flower also treated him well, not neglecting him in the slightest. Ning Chen wasn't in a hurry to return. It was just that every time he faced Daylily, he felt a bit strange. Palace mistress Cherishing Flower clearly didn't know about this. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let a person who didn't even want to face a Xiantian expert come to treat him. Daylily, on the other hand, was very natural. There wasn't anything different about her at all. She was still very quiet as usual. When she spoke, she also gave off a gentle and quiet feeling. Ning Chen adapted for 2 days, and the strange feeling in his heart lessened a bit. He could finally calm down when facing Daylily. Wang Yu would also come over from time to time. However, the name Wang Yu clearly didn't fit her actual name. Compared to Daylily's quiet personality, Wang Yu was the kind of person who would chatter endlessly once they got to know each other. Ning Chen was often annoyed by her, but he didn't dare to say anything harsh due to Daylily's presence. Daylily doted on her little sister very much. Most of the time, she just stood quietly to the side and watched with a faint smile on her face. She didn't say anything. Ning Chen, is venerated dream fierce to you? Not fierce. Is she good to you? She's all right. Then why did you refuse to take her as your master back then? That's none of your business. Ning Chen was so annoyed that he almost said the last 2 words. However, when he saw Daylily smiling to the side, he swallowed them back down and changed his words. Actually, I want to enter the Cherishing Flower Palace. The Cherishing Flower Palace doesn't accept male disciples, Wang Yu said regretfully. Ning Chen faked a laugh. He had already been a eunuch once. He had no interest in disguising himself as a woman and sneaking into the Cherishing Flower Palace. Wang Yu, Sir Ning needs to rest. Let's leave, Wang Yu, who had been silent all this time, said softly. Oh. Wang Yu reluctantly agreed and followed her out of the small courtyard. Ning Chen's smile disappeared. He took a step forward and disappeared. Daylily turned around to look. A faint smile flashed across her gentle and beautiful face. Then, she continued walking forward. Outside the 9-cloud mountain, Ning Chen appeared on a high peak. He was still patiently waiting for the Four Extreme Saint to appear. The moon was shining brightly in the sky. In the distance, the 9 Clouds mountain was peaceful. The arrival of the envoy gave the continent of the 9 Clouds some confidence. Most people still believed that even if the Hall of Immortality had a calamity king that exceeded the fifth tribulation realm, they definitely wouldn't dare be too impudent in the face of the Holy Land's interference. Ning Chen waited for 6 days. He would come every night without the slightest bit of impatience. Finally, the person who was supposed to appear appeared. When half of the night had passed, the purple-clothed four extreme holy emissary appeared beyond the 9 heavens, heading east. On the mountain peak, Ning Chen moved his feet and followed. 300 miles to the west of the 9 heavens mountain, the four extreme saint emissary stopped and waited quietly. Not long after, an illusory figure walked out. The two of them chatted for a while before they left. The four extreme saint emissaries didn't delay at all. They quickly returned in the direction of 9 heavens mountain. However, right when he was halfway there, a plain-clothed figure appeared out of thin air and obstructed his path. The four extreme saint emissaries' brows turned cold. He suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Young man, you've come to the wrong place." "That's right. I've been waiting for you for a long time," said Ning Chen calmly. Without further ado, Ning Chen's body instantly disappeared. Wind and clouds gathered as his sword tore through the air. Boom! The sword and palm collided, causing space to explode. This was the beginning of a life-and-death battle. The intense battle stirred up sand for thousands of feet. Rocks crumbled as they were destroyed by the terrifying shockwaves. The four extreme saint emissary was shocked. He found it hard to believe that the young man in front of him was so powerful. Ning Chen condensed a sword with his finger. The surrounding heaven and earth spiritual energy swirled as he clashed with the four extreme saint emissary. Not long after, the corners of their mouths were dyed red. Ning Chen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His expression was cold. With his current cultivation level, fighting was indeed more strenuous than he had imagined. The four extreme saint emissaries' expression was abnormally heavy. He really couldn't figure out who the young man in front of him was. He was clearly only a second-stage postnatal expert, but he was shockingly powerful. In terms of control over the heaven and earth powers, he was even at a disadvantage. Retreat. The four extreme saint emissary made a prompt decision and quickly retreated. "You think you can leave?" Ning Chen snorted coldly. His figure flashed as he turned into a streak of light and chased after the four extreme saint emissary. With a loud bang, the four extreme saint emissary retreated a dozen steps. A terrifying sword wound appeared on the right side of his chest. It was so deep that his bones could be seen. "You've gone too far." The four extreme saint emissary was enraged. He raised his hand, and the heaven and earth powers gathered around him. He roared fiercely. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He stomped his foot, and a dark yellow light rose around him. The ground suddenly trembled, and cracks appeared. Earth scroll, 1,000 earth revolutions. The ground shook violently, causing the four extreme saint emissary to lose his footing. In an instant, the ground split apart and rose up before quickly closing in the middle. With a loud bang, the four extreme saint emissary was submerged in the ground and disappeared without a trace. The earth scroll revealed the four extreme realms for the first time. Its terrifying divine might shook the world. A moment later, a furious roar came from the ground. The four extreme saint emissary rushed out of his restraints. His hair was dyed red, and he was in a sorry state. Ning Chen jumped into the air, and with a flip of his right hand, he slammed the four extreme saint emissary into the ground once more. In the next moment, Ning Chen took a step and disappeared. He arrived in front of the four extreme saint emissary and stomped down, instantly shattering his meridians. The four extreme saint emissary was unable to bear the pain. His eyes widened, and he fainted. Ning Chen walked up and groped around for a bit before picking him up. His figure flickered, and he disappeared into the night. The Cherishing Flower Palace's western wing. When Ning Chen returned, the sky was already bright. Fortunately, other than Worryless, who was in charge of serving tea, there were very few people in the western wing. Of course, there was also Worryless, who chattered all day. Once the sun rose, Worryless walked over with a basin of water for washing his face. There was a white towel hanging from the basin. "Young master, please," said Worryless softly. Ning Chen revealed a helpless expression. Even after so many days, he still felt a bit awkward. "Miss Worryless, I can do these things myself." Ning Chen bitterly smiled. Having someone with a Xiantian-level Dao physique serve him tea really was a bit strange. Worryless didn't say anything. She had a gentle smile on her face as she quietly stood to the side. "Ning Chen." Just at this moment, a clear voice rang out, breaking the deadlock. "I'm washing my face." Ning Chen replied exasperatedly. He went up and washed his face with water. Why were these two sisters' personalities so different? The only thing they had in common was that one was more difficult to provoke than the other. After Ning Chen finished washing his face, Worryless walked up to the basin and out of the room. At the door, Worryless giggled when she saw Worryless. She then skipped into the room. "Ning Chen, let's have a competition today," said Worryless excitedly. "You have the nerve to say that," said Ning Chen exasperatedly. Just what was this girl thinking? A 7th-rank martial artist fighting a 2nd-rank martial artist. Even he felt embarrassed for her. "I will suppress my cultivation base. I definitely won't bully you." Worryless patted her chest confidently. "No, I'm not interested." Ning Chen refused without the slightest hesitation. "Let's go. Let's have a competition." Worryless directly grabbed him and forcefully dragged him out. "Men and women shouldn't touch each other. You're a girl, so you should be more reserved." Ning Chen couldn't resist, but he couldn't resist either. "I know." Worryless agreed. However, she didn't seem to have any intention of letting go. She used all her strength to drag him out. After a few moments of deadlock, Ning Chen was dragged away. When he was about to leave the courtyard, he saw Worryless. He immediately acted as if he had seen his savior. Unfortunately, Worryless only smiled as usual. She didn't say anything, nor did she stop him. The two of them quickly arrived at the Cherishing Flower Palace's practice field. There were many Cherishing Flower Palace disciples practicing their swordsmanship. When they saw an unfamiliar man appear, they couldn't help but glance over curiously. Worryless quietly followed behind him. Only when they arrived did she softly say, "Go easy on him." "Don't worry, I'll do my best to go easy on him," said Worryless very confidently. Ning Chen smiled helplessly and nodded without leaving a trace. Seeing that someone was about to compete, the Cherishing Flower Palace disciples immediately scattered, opening up a large space for the two of them. "What weapon will you use?" Worryless swung the whip in her hand and smiled. Ning Chen glanced at the weapons on the rack. He took 2 steps forward and pulled out a wooden sword. He said, "I'll use this." Worryless didn't feel that Ning Chen was underestimating her. They were just sparring in the first place. "Be careful." Worryless swung the whip in her hand. In the blink of an eye, the whip coiled like a snake as it swept towards Ning Chen. The disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace all watched the battle nervously. Although they could see that Wang Yu was being lenient and had only used less than 10% of her cultivation, the young man in front of them was really too weak. No one could tell how many attacks he could take. Ning Chen raised his wooden sword and pointed it 3 feet away from the long whip in front of him. Instantly, the power of the long whip within 3 feet was completely neutralized. Taking advantage of this gap, he brushed past the long whip and moved forward. Using the wooden sword, he slapped Forgotten Word's hand. "Ah!" Worryless cried out in pain. Her hand unconsciously loosened, and the whip fell to the ground. Ning Chen put away his sword. The gloominess that had been bothering him for the past few days immediately dissipated. Seeing that Worryless still hadn't reacted, he really wanted to say that he had tolerated her for a very long time. However, Worryless was still beside him, so he magnanimously endured it. The Cherishing Flower Palace disciples all looked at each other. They clearly didn't understand what was going on. It doesn't count. I wasn't prepared just now. Let's do it again. Worryless came back to her senses and rubbed her red hands. Ning Chen was just about to say something when he suddenly sensed a familiar aura. He immediately calmed himself down and placed the wooden sword back on the rack. Worryless, come here, said Worryless softly from the side. Worryless didn't understand what was going on, but she still obediently walked over. Young Master Ning, we'll meet again if fate wills it. Worryless brought Worryless forward. She gently smiled and said goodbye. Chapter 227. Meng Xuanji was here to bring Ning Chen back. In the Azure Flower Hall, Wang Yu and Wang Yu stood quietly to the side. However, Wang Yu's eyes were clearly filled with reluctance. Meng Xuanji and Palace Master Shihua exchanged a few words before leaving with Ning Chen. Wang Yu's eyes reddened as she watched the two of them leave. A little girl's feelings always came and went quickly. After playing around these past few days, in Wang Yu's heart, Ning Chen had already become a very good friend. The daylily was still as tranquil as before. The smile on her face was faintly discernible and faint, making it difficult for others to see it clearly. After Ning Chen returned to the listening bamboo pavilion, the first thing he did was to visit Yunshisan. After a few days, Ning Chen noticed some subtle changes in Yunshisan's body. Yunshisan's cultivation had improved by half a step and could enter the Xiantian realm anytime. However, there was a trace of worry on Yunshisan's face as if he was worried about something. Little Shirtu was also present. Ning Chen patted the little fellow's bun and asked, "What happened to your master?" Little Shirtu was affected by Yunshisan, so his mood wasn't high either. He said in a low voice, "The Holy Land's emissary left Nine Heavens Mountain at some point last night and hasn't returned yet." Ning Chen nodded and said softly, "Don't worry. The sacred envoy is an innate expert. Nothing will happen to him. Perhaps he had something urgent to attend to and didn't have time to inform the sect leader." Little Shirtu responded and quickly regained his good mood. He went out to play without a care in the world. "Are you worried that the longevity hall will come again?" Ning Chen looked at Yunshisan and asked. "Yes." Yunshisan sighed and said, "Once the sacred envoy leaves, the Calamity King and the Immortal Hall receive the news, they will no longer have any scruples and will make a comeback. Dream Supremacy and the Cherishing Flower Palace have already discussed the matter of forming an alliance. As long as the two sects form an alliance, the Palace of Immortality will most likely not dare to act rashly," Ning Chen consoled. "I hope so," Yunshisan said helplessly. Ning Chen smiled. After a few more words of comfort, he left the bamboo listening pavilion and walked towards the Jade Pearl Peak. On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji stood on the peak and looked into the distance. Her beautiful eyes flashed continuously. Ning Chen didn't disturb him. He walked to the other side and cultivated quietly. As the sun set and the moon rose, the night gradually turned cold. Meng Xuanji still stood there quietly, not moving an inch. Boom! At that moment, an earth-shattering explosion sounded. 6 powerful figures appeared outside the great deployment of the 9 clouds. The 6 of them joined forces and destroyed the great deployment of the 9 clouds. The Patriarch of the Continent of the 9 Clouds and the 3 other Zun Masters immediately sensed something. They walked out of the palace and went to the top of the mountain. "Palace Master, come quickly." On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji flipped her hands and formed complicated seals as she transmitted her voiceover. At the same time, Empress Shihua sensed something. Her figure flashed, and she left the Azure Flower Palace. However, right when Palace Master Shi Hua was about to move, a figure clad in flowing light armor appeared and blocked her path. "Palace Master, you won't be able to go anywhere tonight." "Calamity King." Empress Shi Hua's expression changed. How could this be? Shouldn't the Disaster King be at 9 Cloud Mountain? If the Long Life Hall didn't have the King of Calamities, how could they conquer the 9 firmaments? At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through Palace Master Shi Hua's mind. However, she was unable to figure out what had gone wrong. On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji watched as the 6 of them attacked the main peak. Confusion flashed across her eyes. Why hadn't the Disaster King appeared yet? In the depths of the Taixian Peak, golden light rose up. The golden feather centipede floated up and down, releasing terrifying rays of light. Among the 6 of them, one of them held the reincarnation mirror and suppressed the golden feather centipede. The other 5 attacked together, forcing the 4 venerables into a dangerous situation. Meng Xuanji waited for a long time, but the Disaster King still didn't appear. She lightly stepped onto the battlefield. The azure-robed expert with the reincarnation mirror faced Meng Xuanji. The 2 of them joined the battle. The battle instantly became intense. Ning Chen watched the intense battle on the main peak. He didn't look worried at all. The Disaster King hadn't appeared because he had expected the 9 Cloud Mountain and the Cherishing Flower Palace to form an alliance. He was most likely blocking the Cherishing Flower Palace's experts. However, the Disaster King had miscalculated. The 4 holy emissaries he had placed his hopes on had already been crippled by him. They weren't of any use. With only 6 Xiantian experts, they wanted to attack 9 Cloud Mountain. Hopefully, the Long Life Palace could afford that price. The battle on the main peak was becoming more and more intense. The azure-robed expert facing Meng Xuanji was finding it more and more difficult to fight. Before long, he was heavily injured. Without the suppression of the reincarnation mirror, the golden feather centipede was able to display its might once more. With the 4 venerables working together, the battle showed signs of turning around. The unexpected change didn't appear. The 6 of them became more and more shocked as they fought. They didn't understand what was going on. Meng Xuanji sent the azure-robed expert flying with a palm. Her figure flashed, and she entered the golden feather centipede's golden light. Her cultivation technique rapidly soared, and golden light filled the sky. It was like a golden sun had risen, illuminating the Taixian Peak. The power of the 5th Xiantian Tribulation was fully displayed at this moment. Adding on the golden feather centipede's karmic luck, it was infinitely close to the legendary 3 disaster realm. The 5 of them were immediately pierced by the golden light. Only the azure-robed expert with the reincarnation mirror managed to avoid this calamity. "Retreat!" ordered the azure-robed expert, suppressing the roiling blood qi in his body. "You want to leave? It's not that easy." Meng Xuanji's palm descended, and the 6 of them were sent flying. The 3 with weaker cultivation bases were finally unable to endure and crashed into the ground. Buzz! At the critical moment, the reincarnation mirror revealed a power that wasn't inferior to the golden feather centipedes. The azure-robed expert and the other 2 barely managed to block this palm and quickly escaped. Meng Xuanji landed on the ground, her face pale. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Obviously, her body had suffered a great burden from forcefully controlling the golden feather centipede to fight against the 6 of them. "Sect Master, I'll leave this place to you," Meng Xuanji instructed. Her figure flashed, and she quickly flew towards the Xuanji Peak. Meng Xuanji appeared on the Xuanji Peak. Seeing Ning Chen still cultivating on the peak, her eyes flashed. However, she was injured and didn't have time to think. She quickly walked into the Xuanji Hall. Seeing Meng Xuanji enter the hall to treat her injuries, Ning Chen's figure flashed and disappeared. Outside the 9 Cloud Mountain, the azure-robed expert and the other two Xiantian experts of the Eternal Life Hall hurried towards the Eternal Life Hall. Ning Chen followed them for a while, but the three of them were escaping too quickly. Soon, they were out of sight. Not long after, Ning Chen returned. Looking at the Xuanji Hall, his eyes flashed coldly. From today's battle, Meng Xuanji should not be far from the three calamities. He had to make a decision quickly. Once a third expert of the three calamities appeared in the Four Extremities realm, it would be the worst news for the Divine Land. The Master of the Four Extremities realm and the King of Disasters were trying their best to find a third expert of the Three Calamities realm to break through the boundary between the two realms. If Meng Xuanji could enter the Three Calamities realm, the two of them wouldn't have to give up on what was close at hand. They just needed to find a way to get Meng Xuanji to fight once. In the Xuanji Palace, Meng Xuanji, who was still recuperating, suddenly opened her eyes. She looked at the young figure outside the palace and a look of shock flashed across her eyes. Just now, she had sensed a faint murderous aura. This was the first time. Why? Could it be that he was related to the Eternal Life Hall? Ugh! In that moment of distraction, Meng Xuanji groaned and vomited a mouthful of blood. Her aura became extremely unstable. Outside the Xuanji Hall, Ning Chen felt the chaotic aura inside the hall. He walked forward step by step. Looking at the beautiful figure who was forcefully circulating her energy to suppress her injuries, he raised his right hand. Immediately, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth stirred and gathered crazily from all directions, forming a terrifying sword intent. You want to kill me? Meng Xuanji coughed out a mouthful of blood and said hoarsely. Ning Chen shook his head and said coldly, Are you still hesitating? Why? Meng Xuanji tried to stall for time while trying to activate the separation death seal. However, all resistance was futile. Ning Chen would not make such a mistake. Otherwise, he would have died more than 100 times. Don't waste your energy. The separation death seal was already destroyed before I came in, said Ning Chen calmly to Meng Xuanji. Why? Meng Xuanji asked coldly, Did you sneak into the Nine Heavens mountain to kill me? Ning Chen shook his head again and said, No, the idea of killing you was just a spur of the moment. However, if I can destroy a part of your body and prevent you from stepping into the Three Disasters realm, it might be a better idea. You're from the Palace of Immortals? Meng Xuanji said slowly as she tried her best to suppress her injuries. At that moment, Ning Chen's figure flashed past and pointed at Meng Xuanji. A sword formed from snowflakes pierced through her body. The vital energy that she had just gathered shattered once again. I advise you not to think about getting lucky. Ning Chen released his right hand and looked at the snow-colored sword that was dyed red with blood. He said indifferently, As for your question, I can tell you with certainty that I have nothing to do with the Palace of Immortals. At that moment, Ning Chen's doubts had been answered. So the reason Meng Xuanji was wary of him was because she suspected that he was sent by the Palace of Immortals. However, this was not important to him. A strange light flashed through Meng Xuanji's eyes. If he wasn't from the Palace of Immortals, then why did he have the aura of phoenix blood? Also, why did he want to kill her? I'll give you one last chance. Whether or not you can keep this part of your body depends on your answer, Ning Chen said very seriously. If one day, the Master of the Four Extremes asks you and the Disaster King to work together to open a path to another realm, what will you do? After saying this, Ning Chen quietly stood in front of Meng Xuanji. His eyes flashed coldly. To be honest, he didn't want to hear any other answer. However, if Meng Xuanji made the wrong choice, he would not show mercy. Hearing this strange question, Meng Xuanji fell silent. After a long while, she said, No matter when, I will never work together with the Disaster King. Ning Chen looked at Meng Xuanji and slowly said, How can I believe you? Meng Xuanji snorted and said indifferently, If you don't believe me, you can attack. Ning Chen didn't ask any more questions. He stepped forward and pulled out the blood-dyed sword. With a wave of his hand, it disappeared. I hope that in the future, you'll still remember what you said today. With that, Ning Chen turned and left. The Palace of Immortals had been heavily injured this time. They would not be able to deal with the 9 firmaments and the Cherishing Flower Palace in a short period of time. There was no need for him to stay. Chapter 228. Ning Chen walked out of the Xuanji Palace. 2 steps later, his clothes scattered and he disappeared. The human dynasty was bustling with people. It was a bustling scene. Qingli City was the capital of the Lihua dynasty closest to the 4 extremes sacred grounds. Ning Chen walked quietly among the people, looking no different from an ordinary person. As one of the 4 dynasties of the 4 extremes realm, the Lihua dynasty relied on the sacred grounds to exist. Its national power had always been the strongest. This was also the biggest difference between the 4 extremes realm and the divine prefecture. The 4 extremes realm was a world dominated by large sections. In the divine prefecture, all sects had to be controlled by the imperial power. Even if they had a Xiantian expert, they would not dare to touch the bottom line of the imperial power. The divine prefecture had already experienced an era like the 4 extremes realm. However, the appearance of the Great Xia had forcefully changed this situation. Ning Chen had 2 goals in coming here. The first was to find a way to obtain more information about the 4 extremes sacred grounds and even find a chance to enter the sacred grounds. The second was what he needed to do the most right now. He needed to find a sword. Since even Mu Bai and the senior were unable to surpass a sword without a sword, he could only treat those words as nonsense. Finding a suitable sword was the most important thing for him at this stage of the world. The Lihua dynasty was famous for its forging. The 2 divine blacksmiths were famous far and wide. It was the origin of many divine weapons in the world. It was rumored that one of the 2 divine blacksmiths, a heavenly blacksmith, came from the sacred grounds. He was also a guest elder of the sacred grounds. The title of heavenly blacksmith was bestowed by the sacred grounds. In comparison, the title of earthly blacksmith was slightly inferior. It was bestowed by the Lihua dynasty. The difference of 1 word was like heaven and earth. At night, Ning Chen entered the heavenly blacksmith manor. When his spiritual sense swept out, he felt a powerful aura. It was without a doubt a Xiantian expert. Within the heavenly blacksmith manor, thousands of weapons were spread out on high platforms in the 4 weapon halls. Sabers, spears, swords, halberds, all of them were present. Ning Chen searched for a long time. In the end, he shook his head in disappointment and turned to leave. Within the earthly blacksmith manor, a skinny old man stood beside a blazing furnace. The heavy hammer in his hand clanged as he smashed it down, sparks flying. Who would have thought that this ordinary-looking old man was a world-renowned earthly blacksmith? Beside the stove, the little boy who was pulling the bellows was so tired that he was sweating profusely. He kept mumbling to himself. "Master, let's take a break." The little boy raised his head and asked for instructions. "Hold on a little longer, it'll be over soon." The old man impatiently wiped his sweat and said. "You said that 2 hours ago." The little boy grumbled, his face filled with resentment. "You're just a child, so you can't bear even the slightest bit of hardship. Stop talking nonsense and continue pulling. Otherwise, you won't have anything to eat tomorrow." The old man repeatedly raised the hammer in his hand as he lectured them. The little boy lowered his head resentfully and did not say anything else. He obediently pulled the bellows. Dang dang. In the silent night, the sound of hammering echoed through the courtyard. As sparks flew, a silhouette in plain clothes appeared out of thin air, waiting quietly to the side. The little boy was startled to see the figure that had suddenly appeared in the courtyard, and his hands involuntarily stopped moving. A large hand landed on the little boy's head, causing him to cry out in pain. He turned his head to look at the old man with dissatisfaction. "What are you looking at?" "Keep pulling," the earthen craftsman snapped. The little boy pouted and continued pulling the bellows with both hands. Ning Chen patiently waited on the side, his eyes looking at a sword among the many weapons in the hall behind the old man. A moment later, he looked away. Time slowly passed, and the iron sword in the old man's hand gradually took shape. It looked ordinary, but after entering the water, it emitted a chilling coldness. "Venerable sir, what brings you to the earthen craftsman manor?" The earthen craftsman walked to the side and placed the iron sword on the weapon rack. To be able to silently appear in front of him without alerting a single guard, there was no doubt that this person was a Xiantian expert. "This junior has come to ask for a sword," Ning Chen respectfully said. The earthen craftsman walked back to the furnace and calmly said, "Which one do you like?" Ning Chen's eyes moved. In the hall, a dark green sword trembled slightly and flew out. The earthen craftsman glanced at it and said, "Since you've come to ask for a sword, why don't you choose the one with the best material?" Ning Chen gently stroked the sword in front of him and seriously said, "This one suits me the best." There were too many divine weapons in the world, just like the divine sword in the underworld. However, if it wasn't his, there was no point in forcing it. "Help me do something, and this sword is yours," the earthen craftsman slowly said. "Senior earthen craftsman, please speak," Ning Chen calmly said. "There are 3 green jade trees in the Black Rock Sea. I need one, but there are Xiantian experts guarding the place. Whether you want to go or not is up to you," the earthen craftsman said calmly as he tidied up the tools on the furnace. Ning Chen thought for a moment and nodded. This junior will do his best. With that, Ning Chen waved his hand and sent the sword back to the hall. With a move of his feet, he quickly left. Seeing the white figure disappear into the night, the little boy finally dared to speak. He whispered, "Master, is that person really a venerable? He's so young." The earthen craftsman picked up the hammer, tongs, and other forging tools and said casually, "There are many geniuses in this world, and there are also many lucky people. Everyone has their own opportunities. You just need to do your own thing well. There's no need to be envious of others." The little boy nodded. He didn't quite understand, but at the same time, he seemed to understand something. The Black Rock Sea was 1,500 miles away from Qingli City. It wasn't a sea, but a dangerous land filled with rugged mountains. The Black Rock Sea was very large, and it stretched as far as the eye could see. On the black soil, there were black tree-shaped stones. They were densely packed, and from a distance, it looked like a black sea. Ning Chen walked over, step by step in the sea of stones, patiently searching for traces of the green jade trees. The auras of the Holy Land's experts were hidden. If a Xiantian expert deliberately hid himself, it would be very difficult for others to sense him. However, if he carefully sensed it, he could still sense a powerful pressure coming from the Black Rock Sea. After a long time, Ning Chen finally found the location of the green jade trees. His figure flashed, and he quickly rushed over. When he was 100 steps away from the 3 green jade trees, Ning Chen suddenly stopped. His aura surged, and he coldly said, "Why aren't you coming out to see me?" His domineering words echoed through the Black Rock Sea. Combined with the surging spiritual qi, the Holy Land's experts hiding in the shadows unconsciously frowned and walked out. "You are." Facing an unfamiliar expert, Yu Yang Tian didn't dare be careless. A 4-colored medallion appeared in Ning Chen's hand. With a wave of his hand, it flew over. Yu Yang Tian received the medallion and scanned it with his spiritual sense. He immediately knelt down respectfully. "Greetings, Holy Envoy. The Realm Master has ordered you to pick a green jade tree and hand it over to me." "You can't make a mistake," said Ning Chen. Yu Yang Tian frowned once more. What did the Realm Master want with the green jade tree? "Holy Envoy, please wait a moment." Yu Yang Tian respectfully bowed and then walked over to the 3 green jade trees. Circulating his true qi, the ground trembled, and a green jade tree slowly rose up. Yu Yang Tian intentionally left his back to Ningchen. As he collected the green jade tree, he was secretly on guard. However, Ningchen just stood there quietly, not moving at all. There was nothing unusual about him. After a while, Yu Yang Tian let down his guard. Perhaps he really was worrying too much. Holy Envoy, please accept this. Yu Yang Tian walked up and handed over the 4-level sacred medallion and the green jade tree. Ningchen took them, turned around, and walked away. Looking at the former's back, Yu Yang Tian helplessly shook his head. He was becoming more and more suspicious. In the earthly craftsman manner, Ningchen returned. The earthly craftsman and the boy were stunned. This was too fast. Senior earthly craftsman, please fulfill your promise, said Ningchen seriously as he took out the green jade tree. The earthly craftsman's expression became a bit strange. You really want to exchange? The sword you chose can't compare to the green jade tree in your hand. Ningchen gently smiled. No matter how precious this green jade tree is, I can't turn it into a sword. Without senior earthly craftsman's divine skill, it's just a piece of broken wood. You don't need to try to bewitch this old man. I won't fall for it, said the earthly craftsman. To the side, the boy looked down on the old man. It'd be strange if you didn't fall for it. In the end, the earthly craftsman was someone who had seen the world. After being hit by a sugar-coated bullet, he quickly recovered and said, actually, you can also go find a heavenly craftsman. With this green jade tree, even if you ask him to make 100 swords for you, he won't hesitate. Heh. Ningchen inwardly laughed. He did want to, but everyone knew that heavenly craftsmen were from the Holy Lands. For him to take something from the Holy Lands but go find a heavenly craftsman was purely stupid. Senior earthly craftsman's skill is #1 in the world. I don't like the swords made by others. Ningchen continued to bewitch him. The earth craftsman laughed heartily, and said, your temper is very much to this old man's liking. Since you call me senior, I can't take advantage of you. I'll take 1/3 of this green jade wood, and I'll forge a sword for you with the remaining 2/3. Many thanks, senior earthly craftsman, said Ningchen respectfully. The boy covered his forehead. This old man really didn't have the ability to resist. What the boy didn't know was that the earthly craftsman had heard a lot of flattery in his life. How could he be confused by a few words from Ningchen? However, as a craftsman, what he cared about the most was whether or not he could make a more perfect product. With the green jade tree, this desire could be improved. Moreover, in this world, every Xiantian venerable had an extremely high status. Even the imperial families of the 4 great dynasties had to treat them politely, not daring to offend them. Ever since Ningchen appeared last night, his every word and action had given him enough respect. Although the earthly craftsman's personality was strange, he wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for him. In any case, the swords he made were for people to use. Rather than giving it to someone else, he might as well give it to this young man who looked slightly more pleasing to the eye. After preparing for half a day, the earthly craftsman told the boy to guard the house well. Then he brought Ningchen out of Qingli city. Ordinary flames were no longer effective in forging the green jade tree. He needed to find an old friend to help him. Chapter 229. In the north of Li Fire King City, in a remote area, the earth craftsman brought Ningchen over. Not long after, a simple and crude courtyard appeared in front of them. The surroundings were extremely desolate. There were rocks, valleys, and everything else. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of life. Only today did Ningchen understand what it meant to be in the middle of nowhere. He had originally thought that he was low-key enough. He hadn't expected someone to be even better at hiding than him. Old Manly, an old friend has come to see you. The earth craftsman shouted in front of the courtyard, causing Ning Chen's ears to ring. Old Manly, I'm not deaf. There's no need to be so loud. As he spoke, the door of the wooden house was pushed open with a creak, and an old man with a withered face appeared. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and his right leg and left arm were empty. It was a sad sight to behold. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. What a powerful Xiantian. This seemingly ordinary old man was at least a third tribulation Xiantian expert. Oh! What a young child! Old Manly also noticed Ning Chen beside the earth craftsman. A Xiantian expert who wasn't even 20 years old was truly shocking. Greetings, Senior Li. Ning Chen cupped his fists in greeting. To be able to cultivate to the third tribulation Xiantian with such a crippled body, this kind of perseverance and willpower was admirable. However, Ning Chen had still been careful. He had been using spiritual qi to protect himself, hiding his cultivation base to prevent others from suspecting him. Ha! Old Manly laughed hoarsely. He glanced at the earth craftsman and said, Old Manly, you don't come here for no reason. Speak, what do you want from me? The earth craftsman's expression became serious. I'm here to borrow your Li flame. Old Manly was startled and asked in surprise, You obtained the green jade wood? The earth craftsman waved his hand, and a dazzling green jade wood appeared. It looked like jade, but it wasn't jade. Old Manly narrowed his eyes. This was the legendary green jade wood. As expected, it was extraordinary. How did you obtain it? Old Manly looked at Ning Chen. Without question, this green jade wood had been obtained by this young man. This was a treasure of a sacred land, and the earth craftsman had been coveting it for quite some time. I tricked it. Ning Chen said honestly. He knew very well that this matter could not be concealed for more than a few days. It would be exposed soon, so there was no need to lie. How bold! Old Manly smiled, then turned his wheelchair around and said, Follow me. The three of them walked towards the northwest. Not long after, a huge gully appeared in front of them. It was more than 10 feet wide, and they couldn't see the bottom. You may leave. Old Li waved his hand, and the three of them turned into streams of light and entered the ravine. A powerful heatwave assaulted his face. Every time he descended a foot, the temperature would increase exponentially. Half a quarter of an hour later, the three of them descended to the ground. In front of them, a huge platform was surging violently, and blue flames were surging. Even from far away, they could feel the terrifying heat. A glint flashed in Ning Chen's eyes. Was this Li fire? It looked like a flame that was born with the help of the earth fire. It was really strange. The Lihua dynasty was famous because of the Lihua dynasty. Since Old Li was guarding this place, his status must be extraordinary. The earth craftsman walked up and waved his hand, sending the green jade wood into the Li fire. His hands formed a series of seals, and black runes immediately appeared on his right arm. They were like armor that rapidly spread across his entire arm. In that instant, the earth craftsman's aura rapidly soared, only stopping when he reached half-step Xiantian. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. It seemed he had underestimated this earth craftsman. To be able to receive the title of earth craftsman, he truly did have his own extraordinary aspects. Old friend, it's time for you to take action. The earth craftsman glanced at Old Li. Old Li didn't waste any words. He raised his only right hand, and an incomparably powerful energy surged out. The surrounding spiritual qi was drawn into the flames in front of him. The Li fire's color rapidly deepened, turning from blue to inky blue. It crazily roared. The earth craftsman stared at the green jade wood within the flames, waiting for the moment to change. Time slowly passed. Within the Li fire, the green jade wood floated up and down. Green lines began to appear. They were very faint, but they were very clear to the three of them. In that instant, a black gold hammer flew out of the earth craftsman's hand and smashed into the green jade wood. Waves of fire soared into the sky, and the green jade wood trembled. Following the lines, it began to spread, slightly changing its shape. Clang! Another huge sound rang out as the earth craftsman's hammer smashed down once more. Following that, one sound after another rang out incessantly, shaking everyone's hearts. Ning Chen stood to the side and watched, not saying a word. He patiently waited. After an unknown amount of time, a small section of the green jade wood flew out of the leaf fire and stabbed into the stone wall. The earth craftsman didn't bother with it. He continued to focus on the black gold hammer in his hand, forging the most difficult sword of his life. The sun set and the moon rose, and the sun rose again. Day after day passed. Within the leaf fire, the green jade wood pattern became clearer and clearer. The ink blue flame surged violently. As time passed, the blue color gradually faded, turning into a pitch-black color. On the 10th day, dark clouds gathered in the clear sky. With a cracking sound, thunder rumbled, and heavy rain poured down. However, before the rain could even get close to the tree, it was evaporated by the terrifying temperature in the valley. The rain continued for a day and night, and only cleared up at noon the next day. The loud sounds in the valley never stopped, continuing without rest. None of the three knew that outside the valley, the entire world was in chaos. The news of the Holy Land's envoy's accident had finally spread. It originated from the heavenly craftsman going to the Blackstone Sea to retrieve the green jade wood. Yu Yangtian immediately felt that something was wrong and understood that he had been deceived. Half a day later, 3 Xiantian experts walked out from the 4 extreme holy lands. Led by Yu Yangtian, they went all out to search for Ning Chen's traces. As for the Blackstone Sea, there were other experts from the Holy Land guarding it. The Holy Land's envoy went missing, and the green jade wood was deceived. This was the first time in thousands of years that the Holy Land had suffered such a great provocation and humiliation. Especially Yu Yangtian, the anger in his heart was so strong that it was difficult to suppress. After the news spread, the world was in an uproar. All the major sects were shocked by this person who dared to provoke the Holy Land. The 9 Clouds Mountain became the first place the Holy Land's experts went to, because the Holy Envoy's last known location was the 9 Clouds Mountain. However, Yu Yangtian investigated for a few days and didn't find any useful clues. The Holy Envoy's cultivation was extraordinary. If he had been killed in the continent of the 9 Clouds, there would definitely have been traces left behind. The only one who had guessed the truth was Meng Xuanji, but she didn't say anything. She just watched the situation develop. Without any clues or evidence, Yu Yangtian couldn't blame the continent of the 9 Clouds. After all, the continent of the 9 Clouds wasn't an ordinary major sect. The 5 Zun cultivators were extremely strong, especially Meng Xuanji. She was the strongest cultivator in the world who had almost broken through to the 3 disasters layer. In the Fire Valley, the sword forging process had already reached the 19th day. The green jade wood was gradually taking shape in the black flames. The earthly craftsman glanced at Ning Chen and said, "It's your turn." Ning Chen took a step forwards and cut his right hand. Drops of blood fell onto the sword and quickly entered the sword's veins. The earthly craftsman's hammer continued smashing down. Blood splashed everywhere as he completed the final step of tempering the sword. From noon until the bright moon hung high in the sky, the sword that had been forged for 19 days was finally about to take shape. Boom! The moment the hammer smashed down, the sword shone brightly with blood-red light. A surge of sword intent spread out with a bang. The 3 people closest to it were immediately forced back a few steps. Their blood and qi surged. The wind and clouds in the valley instantly changed. The ground trembled and rumbled. "Quick," said the earthly craftsman hurriedly. Ning Chen immediately stepped forward and grabbed the sword. The second tribulation of the Xiantian realm completely erupted, forcefully suppressing the surging sword intent. Arg! With a painful groan, blood surged everywhere. The sword that had just taken shape actually forced its way into Ning Chen's arm. A bloody mist filled the air. It was abnormally shocking. The sword merged with the body. The boundless vitality of the green jade would burst forth. Ning Chen's cultivation immediately rose rapidly. His heaven, earth, and life cyclones rapidly expanded. It only slowed down when he reached the 5th rank. The sword disappeared. The changes in the Fire Valley also stopped. Everything returned to normal. Not far away, the earthly craftsman looked at the sword that had disappeared from Ning Chen's arm. A trace of relief flashed through his tired eyes. His hard work had not been in vain. "Kid, I've already forged the sword for you. However, how much this sword can grow will depend on you," said the earthly craftsman. "Many thanks, senior." Ning Chen respectfully bowed and said. "All right, I'm tired of hearing you say that." The earthly craftsman impatiently waved his hand. He then turned to his old friend and said, "Old Li, it's been hard on you these past few days." Old Man Li smiled and said, "It's nothing." After saying that, he looked at Ning Chen and asked, "Have you thought of a name for the sword?" "Destiny." Ning Chen lightly spat out 2 words and replied. The earthly craftsman and Old Li repeated the name in their minds. They didn't feel too much about this strange name. It was just a name. As long as it wasn't called cat, dog, or cat, it was fine. The 3 of them rested for 2 hours before leaving the valley. Old Li returned to his small courtyard, while the earthly craftsman and Ning Chen hurried back to Qingli City. Half a day later, the 2 of them returned to Qingli City. When Ning Chen heard the news, he immediately understood what was going on. The disappearance of the 4 extreme holy emissary had been exposed. In the earthly craftsman manner, the little boy looked at Ning Chen as he softly recounted what had happened in the past few days. After hearing his little disciple's story, the earthly craftsman strangely glanced at Ning Chen, who was calmly drinking tea as if nothing had happened. He really didn't expect this kid to cause so much trouble. "Kid, you never thought about whether I would sell you to the sacred land," said the earthly craftsman. "Senior earthly craftsman isn't that kind of person. Moreover, Senior doesn't seem to have a good impression of the sacred land." Ning Chen lightly laughed. He wasn't stupid. If it was the heavenly craftsman manner, he definitely wouldn't sit down and drink tea so quietly. "Smart kid," said the earthly craftsman. "Well said." Ning Chen gladly accepted. The little boy curled his lips. "These 2 thick-skinned old foxes, you're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.